I can only imagine, and this is something again that we stress that no matter what service you're in, you have a common respect, I guess is as good a word as any, for anybody that serves across the board, you know. And even I would go so far as to say you have a respect for our enemies because everybody, one way or the other, you raise your hand and you'll die for your country. And if you love your country that much that you're willing to sign the ultimate check, as they call it, you know, it just, I get sick at the fact that we have 1% of our population that ever serves, and that's a crime.
Absolutely.
But that's the way it is, and you know, Keith. This has been very interesting for a land lover, and I one of these days I'd like to get down to St. Mary's, and if we can get gasoline. And,
exactly. Well, we'd love to have you. I'd love to show you around, and I hope you'll invite me back because I got lots of other things I can share with you. And I would like to let your viewers know that right now we just reopened. We had our grand reopening ribbon cutting on Tuesday, so we're back open. We are requiring masks for the time being till things get a little better down the road a little bit. But we're open from Tuesday through Saturday from 10 to 5. In fact, Gianna, my gift shop manager, is there holding down the fort today while I'm doing this interview with you, and I wanted to give a shout-out to her. She speaks submarine pretty well, too. Her grandfather was a World War II submariner, did 11 war patrols on the Drum. Her dad was in the Navy, in the surface Navy. We've since forgiven him for that, but that's okay. And her husband's a retired submariner, and right now her son, Jeffrey, is on the West Coast serving our nation in uniform, too.
That's fantastic. You've been listening to America's Web Radio and David's Pick with our special guest, Keith Post, U.S. Navy retired, and I think he's getting over the, even though he's the director of the museum, the submarine museum, maybe he's finally getting used to having his feet on dry dirt. Anyway, we'll be back next week with more on America's Web Radio.
If you live to serve and want to make an even bigger difference, consider joining the U.S. Army. With training in fields like medical care, linguistics, and engineering, an Army career can amplify your efforts with humanitarian opportunities all over the world. Plus, you'll receive competitive pay and incredible benefits, so you'll be taken care of, too. Learn more at GoArmy.com.
This is Dr. Susan Blank, Medical Director for the Atlanta Healing Center. Our team is able to offer a multitude of treatment options such as quantitative EEG, also known as brain mapping, hormonal and nutritional assessments, neuropsychological testing, and cognitive therapy, along with traditional 12-step facilitation. And we can even offer you, if appropriate, a gentle medically managed detox. Please contact us at 770-696-9862.
This is America's Web Radio. Would you like to have a show, talk about your business, or express your opinion on America's Web Radio? Just email gm@americaswebradio.com and we'll get back to you. Thank you.
My name is Rick White, and I'm the director of the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame. I want to encourage all Georgia veterans.
People all around the country wanted to participate in the efforts of this group, and they wanted to join, but they were unable to do so unless they were physicians. It's for this reason that the Docs for Patient Care Foundation was created. Now, everyone can join the fight and become a member.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Good morning and welcome to America's Web Radio, and it's time for a veteran's story. Before we get to Pete Mecca and his guest on a veteran's story, we always like to start any of our veteran or military-oriented shows with a pause and just a silent prayer for all of those that have served, our veterans, our folks that are serving today, and those that plan on serving in the future. So we're going to take 1 minute, and we'll be right back with a veteran's story. Amen. And it's now time to start a veteran's story, and we've got Pete Mecca and his guest on the line. So let's get going with Pete, and it's all yours, Pete.
Thank you, David. Good morning, America. This is Pete Mecca, your host for A Veteran Story on AmericasWebRadio.com. My guest today, Jeff Bickerton, is much like yours truly. We were both addicted to aviation from early childhood. As a matter of fact, we both trained on the little Cessna 150, a great little trainer, but as we matured, so did the aircraft that we flew. In Vietnam, Vic served as a crew chief on the Canadian-built U-1A Otter, one of the unsung, invaluable aircraft of the Vietnam War. Vic, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Pete. I'm honored to be here, and I've read some of your books and some of these stories, and I sometimes feel I'm not in the same league as these guys and ladies that you've interviewed. But thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. Vic, you most certainly are. Like I tell everybody, hey, you made out of boot camp, you got a story to tell. All right, Vic, we're going to start out with where you were born and raised, but your childhood, and sometimes exciting and sometimes sad, is a very unusual story. So take the ball and run with it. Where are you born and raised, and tell us a little bit about your childhood.
Well, I was born in New York, Queens, New York, and from great parents, Gloria and David Bickerton. And Gloria had a brother and a sister, and David had one sister. And it's important, her name was Claire Bickerton, and my mother and David's sister were great friends. So Gloria and Claire, and they hung out, and they were models and business women in New York City, and occasionally they would take the train up to West Point and go to dances up there. And Claire met her husband Andy up there, and Andy Evans, and that's relevant later on in my youth. But my mother Gloria married David, so that's how it started. They were very productive in the early years and had children, and especially after the war. And Andy and Claire had 4 children: Jay, Dick, Susu, and Kathy, and of course my mother had at that time 3 children: my older brother Steve, myself, and my younger sister. And first things I remember was when my father came to me. We lived in Queens Village, New York, on the island, Queens, and he called me upstairs to go see my mother. She was laying in bed, and she said, she and he told me that she was very sick. And what had happened is she got polio, and she was pregnant with my youngest brother. And we, of course, at polio, I didn't understand what it was, and no one had any idea how bad it was going to be. But we eventually had to split up the family because she was in such bad shape, and literally they took out a train on a railroad, on the train took out a window on a train going up to Buffalo. University of Buffalo had a polio ward, and they put her through the window because she couldn't walk, and took her up to Buffalo, and that's where she was. And we were sort of, I always say, we were farmed out to different relatives. My brother and I stayed with my grandmother for a while, short amount of time. I can't remember the timing, but we eventually went down to Alabama to Maxwell Air Force Base and lived with the Evanses. That was Claire Bickerton's husband, Andy Evans was just back from Korea, and he was a prisoner of war there, the senior most prisoner of war, because he was also an ace in World War II. He flew the P-51, and he's also a wing commander in Korea and was shot down, and he was finally, after really a tough POW stint, he was released. And I'm telling you, it had to be he was very thin when he got back. And he took 3 kids into his house. My older brother, Steve, myself, and my sister, Terry. And it was incredible. So we had 7 kids living in the officers' quarters down at Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama. But for a young 6 or 7-year-old, I can't remember exactly how old I was, but having expanded family, and Dick Evans, one of the sons, was my age, and we hung out all the time, had great times together. Still consider them as my brothers and sisters. And we stayed down there until they were transferred. Of course, the Air Force, you never stay in one place for a while. Andy recovered his strength and his physique and everything like that, and he was a pilot, of course, and they had jets taken off, and they had golf courses and swimming pools. I never wanted to go back to New York. I thought this was the place to be. So that sort of set the stage for me as far as my childhood was concerned. Wonderful people. They treated me great. When they were transferred, my folks had to find some other place for me and my brothers, and we went in different directions. I wound up going to my father's Army buddy in Indiana. He had a son my age and sister, and I stayed out there for a couple of years. They were just awesome people, and it just set me up to say, I don't really want to live in New York. It's not my style. I want to out where you could be free.
A lot of people are saying that in New York now too.
Yeah. But so we were separated, and eventually got the family back together in my final year of grammar school, and then 4 years of high school. I went in high school, Andrew Jackson High School in Queens. That was a shock.
Vic, I'm going to back you up just a minute, because
we have several generations that don't even know about polio, and they don't even know about the iron lung, which your mother had to use to survive. Tell us what the iron lung was and how long your mother had to be in this iron lung.
An iron lung was like a big tube with like surgical inserts coming in from the side to somebody could reach in and help her and things like that on both sides, and it inflated the chest with air pressure because the whole body was in it except for the head. So her head was laying on a pillow outside the iron lung. It was incredible, and I don't know how long she was in it. It had to be years because her body was devastated. The other thing which is amazing is my younger brother. I mentioned she was pregnant. My younger brother was the first baby ever born in an iron lung, and the Lord only knows how that happened, but had to be cesarean. Regardless, he was in good health, didn't have polio, and he went and lived. He was given over to one of my aunts, who David thought his Aunt Maud was his mother. I mean, he lived with him probably till he was 6 or 7. But regardless, we tried to get the family back together when I was in grammar school. And my mother's saintly mother remodeled her home, put a couple of bedrooms in, and we all got back in St. Albans, New York. But my mother was 13 years handicapped from polio. Eventually, could walk and but was always wheelchair ridden. She could walk a couple of steps, but it devastated her body. But her mind was incredible, and she raised.
And she had limited use of her fingers, but yet she learned to type and type for a newsletter. Is that correct?
Right. She for the Buffalo Gazette or something like that, but it was about polio, all polio victims, and she typed. The March of Dimes got us her electronic, one of the first electronic typewriters, and it's hard to describe, but the wheelchair had bars that went out over it on bungee cords. The left hand couldn't do anything; it just sat in a pouch off to the side. I mean, an elbow support and a hand support. Her right laid in a tray with a little pivot under her palm, and it was on a bungee cord, so she could type. Her finger. The only thing she worked on her was her fingers and a little bit of arm and shoulder motion. That was the only thing that worked really well. So she could bounce up and down and type on the electric typewriter. So she wrote for the paper. I never could find that. I went up to Buffalo one time as a salesman up there and stopped by and see if anybody had any record of those papers, but couldn't find it. It's probably on
I'll tell you what, God bless the polio vaccine. Holy cow.
You bet.
Yeah. Okay. We are going to our first break, ladies and gentlemen. Stay with us. We're coming back to discuss what Vic did after high school. Stay with us.
Hi, this is Rocky Blair, former four-time Super Bowl champion with the Pittsburgh Steelers and Vietnam veteran. As a board member, I'd like to talk to you about Warriors to Citizen, a nonprofit organization that helps American heroes, soldiers, police, fire, EMT, and their families recover from the psychological harm caused by career-induced stress. Over the last 20 years, broken relationships have been a major causal factor for the highest documented divorce rate and resulting suicides in this population. This program, From Warriors to Citizen, is delivered free to families by professionals, all whom served in uniform and understand the needs to be addressed. I ask for your support, so please go to our website, warriorstocitizen.org, and find out how you can help, either by making a donation or sharing this information with an American hero that you may know. And thank you.
Hello, my name is Rick White, and I'm the director of the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame. I want to encourage all Georgia veterans to consider being nominated to the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame. And if you are a Georgia veteran, and the definition of a Georgia veteran is either you were born in the state of Georgia, or you've lived here 10 years, or you were raised your right hand, joined the military in this state, you are considered a Georgia veteran. For further information, go to www.gmbhof.org, or you can contact me at 678-427-0915. We'd love to have your nomination for the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame. Thank you so much.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, David. We're back with Vic Bickerton. Vic, tell us about what you did after high school. It seems I remember you said you walked around an airport somewhere.
We live pretty close to Kennedy Airport, saw all those new things they call jets flying over, and I just wanted to be there because I didn't really want to stay in. Didn't have money for college, so I had to go get a job. So I worked for my father in the city, and I didn't want to during the summer in high school, and I didn't want that job at Bickerton Packing and Trucking Company, but he wanted me to work there. I didn't want to. I walked around the airport and luckily walked into United Airlines hangar area, and they had an operations office out front, and somehow wangled a job out of them and got a clerk's job in the flight operations office. It was really eye-opening as far as aircraft, flying, pilots. Back then they called them stewardesses. It was a world I really thrived in and wanted to be part of. So I started flying lessons after speaking with a pilot, trying to figure out how I could become a pilot. I also saw the young women back then coming in to argue with crew scheduling about their schedules, and thought, this was the age of, as I said, stewardesses. They had to be young, single, personable, beautiful, kind. I don't know, but they also, this was the age of miniskirts, and my Lord, I was a 19-year-old kid, and I certainly appreciated that. And so I put everything I could, every cent I made with United Airlines, into flying lessons, and I got my private and was literally working on my commercial pilot's license when I already passed a written test and had about 20 more hours of flight time before I could qualify to get my commercial license. And I received my draft notice. Now, my brother Steve, about a year older than I was, got his draft notice, and they took him down to the induction center at Whitehall Street in Manhattan, and said, when he was there with the big group, he said, anybody with the last name A, B, or C, step into this room, and there was a Marine drill sergeant, and he said, welcome to the Marines, boys. And my brother was down in Paris Island that night, and he was not a Marine type. He was a much bigger person than I was, stronger and everything like that, but he was a bookworm. And so he was not a Marine material, but I got my draft notice, and I said, I don't want to be in the Marines. I want to stay around flying. And everything I checked out with the recruiter would require 4 years. If I went to OCS and became an officer and tried to get into flight school, they could guarantee anything then. It was 1966. They were end of 96. They were building up the helicopter war. Warrant Officer School would get me probably 2 tours in a helicopter in Vietnam. So I joined as a fixed-wing mechanic. I'd still have to give them 3 years, but I wouldn't let them induct me into the ground pounders, or the legs, as Airborne calls them. I just didn't want to do that, but I joined as a mechanic, as I said, and that required 3 years commitment. I wanted to get back to United, finish my commercial, and fly for them. They were actually hiring then. So I chose Army Aviation, and took a train down to Fort Jackson, I think it was, down in South Carolina, then a bus down to Fort Gordon. I went through basic training down at Fort Gordon, and didn't have any problem with basic training. I could handle it easily. I was in great shape. And then I was sent off to Fort Rucker with some people. I actually, in basic training, I felt so good about it. I volunteered for Airborne Ranger and all that stuff. Thank God they didn't pay any attention to me. So I guess they would have just changed my MOS and put me in the infantry where I didn't want to be anyway. But regardless, I did go down to Fort Rucker, the home of Army Aviation, and I was trained as a single-engine mechanic, fixed-wing mechanic. And it was pretty easy for me. I was mechanically inclined. But I ran across this one sergeant. I'll just call him Sergeant X. He was I can't remember the name. I wish I could, because I would have liked to talk to him now. But he really got on my nerves. He was a crazy. I thought he was crazy. Anyway, I didn't like him very much. Later on, after Rucker, I went off to Savannah, Hunter Army Airfield. We were the first Army people to arrive there. It was great because they had Air Force civilian cooks still working. It was a great place to work. They had a couple of the Havilland Beavers, and they were bringing in helicopters, and they had bird dogs and things like that, and spotter planes. eventually, I was down there for a while, eventually got orders for Vietnam, which I didn't have to go because my brother was there. So he was already in the Marines over there. So I wound up staying in Savannah while my unit went off to Vietnam. And I knew, of course, where they went and all of that stuff. I eventually got orders and to go to Vietnam, and made a visit home, of course, and took my time getting out there. The airlines were they were free. You could just fly anywhere you want. So I stopped in Chicago and Denver and was leaving out of Fort Lewis. But that was a good thing for me because I really enjoyed my time in Savannah. And the funny part about it is the military had a plan. The day I left Fort Lewis for Vietnam, my brother landed in Travis Air Force Base in California, and the same day I took off. So they had it pretty well timed. So and it just happened to be January. He just got through up by the DMZ, and I flew into Cam Bay, which was on December 2nd. I'm sorry, February 2nd, 1968.
Yeah,
if anybody knows about Vietnam, the Tet Offensive happened on the evening of the 1st, or the 30th or something. I mean, it was going on when I arrived at Cam Bay, and on a commercial airliner, and they hustled us off, and flares were in the sky over the bay, and all that stuff, and I could hear artillery going off. It was surreal. I said, well, I guess this is what war is all about over here. So I wound up, the transit barracks was just a crazy place because they were trying to get rid of everybody as fast as they can get them in. So I eventually got out of there by helicopter up to Nha Trang and C-123 on up to Quy Nhon, and reported into the 223rd Battalion there. And I walk into that place, and who's sitting behind the desk is Sergeant X from Dothan, Alabama, and I'm going, oh man, this guy again. But anyway, he remembered me he was very nice, and all of a sudden he was like a human. I don't know, maybe this was his element or something, but he said, Bickerton, we're going to change your orders here. I see you're a pilot, and you got your license and all. We did some small talk, of course, and then he wound up. And I say, whoa, Sergeant X, I'm fine. I want to go up to Bam Me To It, up there in the Highlands. Oh, it's where my unit is all, and all my buddies are up there. No, you don't want to go up there. I said, yes, I do. And he said, I know you think you do, but you don't. We're going to keep you here at the 18th Aviation Company, and they fly otters. And I said, I didn't even know what an otter was. And he said, we're gonna send you up to Pleiku. You're gonna train up there on the ramp to work on otters. And I go, oh man, I walked out of there. I was so pissed at Sergeant X. I'll tell you what, if I knew it now, I would have given him a big hug, because I've been in the Bam Me To It. It wasn't any great place to be, especially in some of these insurgencies that the VC were doing back then. Regardless, I wound up staying with the 18th Aviation Company, which is a super group, and I went up to Pleiku, up to Camp Holloway in the Highlands, and we had a platoon up there, and I worked on the ramp on the otters when they came in, and the crew chief showed me how to do it and all that stuff. I was up there probably 2 or 3 weeks, and some guy came into our tent, and we were staying over at the Special Forces camp because that's who we served, the 5th Special Forces. We flew them out to their camps and brought out supplies and all that kind of stuff along the Cambodian border. And we were up at the camp, and I get this guy comes into the tent and says, "Hey, the captain wants to see you over this tent." So I remember walking over there. It was at night, and opened back the tent flap and looked in, and there was. He said, "Come on in," and he was sitting there around a table with another officer, and I had hardly even met him, probably a couple of times, but I didn't remember who he was. But I walked in there, and he said, "Well, I got some bad news for you. Your father has passed away." And he actually died of his first heart attack. So he of course, he was a smoker and a drinker like most people were back then. And my mother had already died a week before I graduated high school. Wow. So now I didn't have anybody. So he said, "We're sending you home for 30 days. And he sent me home, and we arranged a funeral and everything for my father. But I also got to know my future wife, who I only met about a week before I left for Vietnam, and wound up getting to know her a lot better, and she helped me out a lot. And it was good to have some support from the home front. And we wound up living with my grandmother. My grandmother again took care of the kids, and I wound up going back to Vietnam for the second time. And when I got back,
Ben, I'm going to have to interrupt you for our second break. Great story. We'll get back to your going back to Vietnam after taking care of your father and everything. Folks, we'll be right back. Stay with you.
If you live to serve and want to make an even bigger difference, consider joining the U.S. Army. With training in fields like medical care, linguistics, and engineering, an Army career can amplify your efforts with humanitarian opportunities all over the world. Plus, you'll receive competitive pay and incredible benefits, so you'll be taken care of, too. Learn more at GoArmy.com.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls of all ages, join me, Roger B., every Tuesday at 1400 hours right here on America's Web Radio for the Locked and Loaded Show. We will talk about guns, weapons, ammo, gun accessories, prepping, and so much more. So be sure to join us every Tuesday at 1400 or 2 p.m. for Locked and Loaded on America's Web Radio.
Hello, my name is Rick White, and I'm the director of the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame. I want to encourage all Georgia veterans to consider being nominated to the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame. And if you are a Georgia veteran, and the definition of a Georgia veteran is either you were born in the state of Georgia, or you've lived here 10 years, or you were raised your right hand, joined the military in this state, you are considered a Georgia veteran. For further information, go to www.gmbhof.org, or you can contact me at 678-427-0915. We'd love to have your nomination for the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame. Thank you so much.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Okay, folks, we're back with Vic. He had left Vietnam for 30 days to take care of his father after his father passed. He's back in Vietnam, and Vic, you got assigned to Reliable 713. What in the world was Reliable 713?
That was a de Havilland Otter that I took over to become the crew chief. Crew chief is someone that flies with the plane every day, maintains it, does the weight and balance. I mean, you're literally. I became my own stewardess with 7-3, but also the mechanic.
You didn't have to wear a miniskirt, though, right?
No. Okay. Luckily, still wear boots. But regardless, Ted gave me his toolbox and showed me all around. See, I had been away. Somebody must have thought I was still up in Play 2 learning about the Otter, but I wasn't an expert in it at all. But I had to study the books and everything like that. But Ted was a great help, the crew chief before me, and he was getting out of the Army. And I wound up taking over Reliable 713. and it was really 58-1713. And our call sign for the 18th Aviation was reliable. So that's when you talk to air traffic control or tower or anything like that, you were reliable 713. But we'd go on different missions, and almost every day we'd have some different pilots flying, warrant officers. Sometimes we didn't have enough, and I got to fly right seat, which was a great thing. I eventually learned how. One of the guys had his civilian instructor's rating, so he was able to write my logbook and give me some flight time and sign me off, as they say in the logbook. But I wound up learning how to land it and doing stalls and taking off and everything like that. But we flew missions to support the 5th Special Forces in most cases, and then we had some other courier runs. But 5th Special Forces were headquartered in Trang, and also they had regional headquarters up in Pleiku. So I was sent to the different platoons and did some different courier runs, and that's what you usually start off with, because they get kind of boring flying into the same place all the time. But then eventually I became what they called a floater ship. They had me sort of based in Quinyan down by the coast, but when one of the planes from Pleiku would have to come in from maintenance, that's where our maintenance base was, Quinyan, they'd fly down and I'd fly up there and take their spot. So I flew out of Da Nang. I flew out of Pleiku, of course, and then also Nha Trang down the coast. And from Nha Trang, we went south toward Saigon, toward Canton, across the Delta, Lac Dinh, and all those places. But made a lot of stops.
Back up just a minute. Number one, you had a very unusual assignment in Vietnam, because most guys just got stuck in one corps. You know, like the Marines were in I Corps, or maybe the River Rats down in the Delta, and that's all they knew. But you went to all 4 corps in Vietnam. That's very unusual. Very unusual. But also, explain what a reliable 713 is. Tell the folks exactly what an Otter is.
Okay, an Otter, it was de Havilland made utility aircraft for the Canadians and put them on floats and all that kind of thing. They made a Beaver, which was very successful and still flies today. And then they made its bigger brother, the Otter. It also made a twin-engine aircraft called a Caribou, and that was there before we were. That was flying for the Army before I got there, but the Otter was a large aircraft. Had a crew of 3, could handle comfortably 10 fully armed soldiers with their full packs, everything like that, 9 or 10, and then also carry cargo. The seats would fold up, and you could double doors on the side, and the crew chief sat in the back by the double doors, had an open window, and of course the crew up on the flight deck. But we carried everything you can think of out to the Special Forces camps, and carried passengers, transported the paymaster, the chaplains, took back dead soldiers and prisoners, all kinds of things. Anything you could think of, we carried. I can remember carrying sides of beef, bar stools. Believe it or not, they set up a bar underground out at one of these Special Forces camps. I think it was Budap Special Forces Camp. And, I mean, we carried goats for the mountain yards and chickens, and, of course, they weren't loose, but regardless, all kinds of things. Anything you could load on an airplane, we could carry. And the beauty of an Otter was that it was a STOL aircraft, STOL, short takeoff and landing. It was probably the premier small STOL aircraft of its time that could carry a load. The Caribou was taken away from the Army just before I got there and was turned over to the Air Force. And the Air Force did a lot of missions, but the Special Forces was so really upset that they lost the Army support. And we sort of were the main, almost flying into some of these camps every day bringing supplies. Because some of them were out, you wouldn't want to take some of the roads out to these remote locations. So it was a support airplane, and we did some crazy flying into some of these places. Really dense jungles, dirt runways, all of that. And I enjoyed seeing how the Special Forces did. I mean, most of them had a perimeter, a barbed wire area full of mines and everything like that. They call it the wire. And then out beyond that was jungle and Cambodia, or Laos. And there were usually mountains around, depending on where you were. But so it was a dangerous country. I got to fly in one Special Forces camp had a mountain yard village, which were the native, sort of like the Aborigines of Australia. They were the native people. They didn't consider themselves Vietnamese, and worked with us quite a bit. They were real primitive people, wonderful people. And I got to visit a Special Forces camp. I mean, a mountain yard camp, and meet the elders and all that kind of stuff. It was pretty cool. For a young kid, I was 21 at that time when I was in Vietnam, and just turned 21, and it was a real education. I'll tell you a story about flying into a rubber tree plantation, north of Saigon, out by Lac Ninh there, and we had to pick up drop off and pick up some special, an A-team, they called it, of Special Forces guys. I guess one was replacing the other. And so we landed on dirt road, came over the trees and down onto an opening in the rubber tree plantation. And there was a team of Special Forces sitting there on their equipment. And we all stopped, and it was around lunchtime, and we all started talking as they unloaded and reloaded, and it was an interesting time. They thought that we were pretty clear, and we heard a helicopter coming, and all of a sudden, out from under, now we landed north-south and east-west, out from under this road that cut across, came out from under the trees, came two helicopters. One, I think, was a Loach, was a smaller helicopter, and the other was a Huey. And they flew right across the opening we landed in and went back in under the trees. And my mouth was...
Under the trees. Under the trees.
Under the trees. Under the trees. I couldn't believe what I just saw. And I talked to one of the Special Forces guys. I said, Green Beret guy, I said, what? Did I just see what I saw? He says, oh, yeah. He says, that's how they break in the new guys. They're cowboys, proving that they're cowboys. Holy mackerel. I just couldn't believe it. Rubber trees are huge, and if they're planted if there's a road down between them, there's plenty of room to fly a helicopter just off the road, have 5 feet off the road and go scooting down. But it just blew my mind. So that was one of the things I saw when I was there, and I just couldn't believe.
Well, chopper pilots are not known to be mentally sound.
You couldn't. You just had to have a feel for the aircraft. do what you wanted, and obviously those guys could do it.
You were taking off from a dirt road at a rubber tree plantation, so that otter, it had to take off and land in very limited space. How many feet?
I'd say they took off, and I'm just generalizing. I'd say they took off, because I didn't have to be an expert in it. I just had to ride in it. But they get out in 1,000 feet and get up in 1,300 feet. They could get up over a 50-foot tree. And landing, they could probably land in 600 to, depending on headwinds and everything. They had a strong engine, probably about 600 feet on a landing, because they could really drop the flaps and drop in there. But I'm telling you, these things were incredible for its time. In this day and age, turbo props, reversible props, all of that kind of thing, you could do better. Actually, there was a Swiss airplane, I think it was Swiss, the Pilatus, something like that. The CIA was flying the Air America, and they were flying these things. I'd see them all around different places.
Yeah, that's my buddy.
They
okay.
had a reversible turbo.
Vic, I'm sorry, Vic. We got to go to our last break.
You bet.
We're going to get back and discuss maybe you taking some fire on your aircraft, but also your trip to Marble Mountain up in I-Corps and the Marines up there. Folks, we'll be right back.
Whether cruising the Strip in a 57 Chevy or taking the family on a vacation in a 71 Oldsmobile Vista Cruiser, you need to tune in to Classic Cars with Steve Ronaldo and Jim Weber every Saturday from 8 to 9 a.m. on americaswebradio.com.
Hi, this is Rocky Blair, former four-time Super Bowl champion with the Pittsburgh Steelers and Vietnam veteran. As a board member, I'd like to talk to you about Warriors to Citizen, a nonprofit organization that helps American heroes, soldiers, police, fire, EMT, and their families recover from the psychological harm caused by career-induced stress. Over the last 20 years, broken relationships have been a major causal factor for the highest documented divorce rate and resulting suicides in this population. This program, From Warriors to Citizen, is delivered free to families by professionals, all whom served in uniform and understand the needs to be addressed. I ask for your support, so please go to our website, warriorstocitizen.org, and find out how you can help, either by making a donation or sharing this information with an American hero that you may know. And thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls of all ages, join me, Roger B., every Tuesday at 1400 hours right here on America's Web Radio for the Locked and Loaded Show. We will talk about guns, weapons, ammo, gun accessories, prepping, and so much more. So be sure to join us every Tuesday at 1400 or 2 p.m. for Locked and Loaded on America's Web Radio.
This is America's Web Radio. Would you like to have a show, talk about your business, or express your opinion on America's Web Radio? Just email gm@americaswebradio.com and we'll get back to you. Thank you.
Okay, Vic, let's jump in that otter, crank up the engine. Let's fly up to Marble Mountain in I-Corps. Tell me about that day.
That was pretty good. I was just going to say that airplane could get in and out of places, and because they had, one of the reasons they had incredible flaps on them and a strong engine. So, but the trouble was you'd have to crank up the flaps to start cruising. So you'd have to circle the airfield. So quite a bit. It wasn't one of these things that just blasted out of there and it was gone. So we became a good target if anybody wanted to shoot at us. So we had a couple holes in my plane, and then also some of the other guys got hit pretty good with any aircraft fire or anybody shooting at us. But I one time was on a mission, and we we were up in Central Highlands, and we were finishing up in. We went north of Kantoon into Dak To and all that stuff, and then we kept going toward the northwest off toward Da Nang, and that was out by the coast. That was a good place to finish your day anytime, was to get over to the coast. And we had a platoon up there at Marble Mountain Marine Airfield, just on the east side of the beach side of Da Nang. And it was a very good base. I mean, a lot of Marine helicopters, and there was some Army units there, and we had our platoon there, which was about the platoon was about 4 otters in the crews and everything like that. But I staying overnight, and someone had told me, probably one of the Special Forces guys, about smoking pot, and I was not a smoker at all. But I thought, so I went in there, and after the crew, the officers headed off, I taxied over with the airplane and got some to get some fuel, and I could tell this guy was I guess you'd call him a junkie now, but he was a head, and he had the beads around his neck and all this kind of thing, and the Fu Manchu mustache. Anyway, he was fueling the plane. I think his name was Duke or something like that. So Duke, I said, Duke, do you know any place I get some pot? He said, yeah. He says, I know somebody. I can get you some. He said, come over to the NCO club tonight at 8 or whatever it was, and I'll meet you over there. We'll have a couple beers and we'll go on. So I wound up meeting him over there. We walked out to the southwest perimeter. There was a bunker out there with sandbags up on the top, and they were all formed in a C shape for just in case there was an attack, you could hide behind those on top and fire at the enemy. There was guard towers along the wire and everything like that. But there was 4 guys sitting up top. We climbed up there and sat down, and one of the guys was passing around a joint, so I gave it a shot. And it was probably one of the nicest evenings I ever spent in Vietnam. The stars were out, sea breeze. It was a beautiful night. We talked about home, about families, about it. All I remember was a great night. Then old Duke hits me on the, gives me an elbow and says, "Hey, here's the guy that could help you out. Here comes this guy. I knew he was a hippie. He had a bandana around his head. He had the sunglasses at night, But he climbs up on the bag, and we talk a little bit, and the next thing he lights up something. He says, "Here, I want you guys to try this," and he passes it down the line, as they do with marijuana. And it came around to me. I was at the end of the line, and on the other side from him, and I took one hit of this thing. Again, I wasn't a smoker anyway. I didn't smoke cigarettes, but this went into my lungs and went directly to my brain. I mean, I thought to myself, my God, what in the name was that? So, what was that? And I was so dizzy. I rolled off the bunker into the sand, and next thing I know, Duke jumps off, and he says, "Are you all right?" I said, "Oh my God!" I said, "My head is just totally spinning. I don't. What was that?" And all of a sudden, the first rocket came in right over us and hit a hooch that was probably 50 yards away or something like that, and just took off the end of the hooch. And that was just the first. But instead of going into the bunker, everybody jumped down and ran in toward the perimeter. I mean, all I remember sand and boots and butts heading toward the barracks and the airfield, and I was following, and I thought to myself, what in God's name's going on? I got up against some kind of structure. I don't even remember what it was. And I lay there in the sand because I didn't know where I was. I didn't know where the interior bunkers were or anything. And then another rocket comes in. There was 18 rockets That's what one report. One said 22. I don't remember. I wasn't counting, but I lay there with my head on the ground in the sand, up against this building or structure, and I had a tremendous self-talk. It was, thinking to myself, what am I doing? And so I knew before I laid there for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, whatever it was, when it started to clear, I realized that I had to, I had one mission there. It was to get home and make it out of here. And, I thought to myself, I need to stay focused and stay frosty, stay alert, don't lose my focus, and just be aware of what was going on, and always be armed. And so because all I had with me was a pocket knife, and if they came through the wire or through the gates or whatever, I had nothing. I didn't know where I was. That was never, ever going to happen to me again. And to this day, it really taught me a lesson for the rest of my life. I even when I'm in dangerous situations, I always know what's going on, think about the possibilities and things like that. But it's kept me going for a long time, and I made it back to the world, as they said, and left the Army in 1969. But and wound up marrying my girlfriend and went off to college down in Florida, got my commercial instrument rating and all of that kind of stuff, and wound up working in air cargo industry for the rest of my career. And I had a good life, and never smoked again.
So you tried marijuana that one time. You got rocketed, and you had what they call a come to Jesus a moment. Is that correct?
Then some. Yeah, you don't forget that when you get your ear on the ground, and every time the rocket hits, the sand lifts off the ground slightly into your. So it just makes you aware of, you're in God's hands, as they say.
Yeah.
But,
there are no agents in foxholes.
I was sure lucky that Sergeant X had put me in otters. I'll tell you, when I flew up over the clouds and looked down into some of those places out there in Oshawa Valley or along the DMZ, and thought about walking through some of that stuff out by Quezon and down by Loch Ninh and all what was that, Nui Ba Din, which is a mountain down by Tay Ninh, which many aircraft were into the side of that thing because it was just popped up like a pimple on the face of the earth, and on cloudy days. We didn't have great navigation systems in Vietnam, so you had to do a lot of pilotage and flying under the clouds and things like that. So you can get in trouble real quick. And there were people that just could get lost in the clouds and couldn't get their way back down. We flew with some great pilots with these otter guys. Many of them wound up being airline pilots. I never could, because when I got back, the time I got through 2 years of college, the airlines needed 4. When I got 4 years of college, excuse me, they needed a air transport rating, and I was broke, so I couldn't. I came to Atlanta looking for a job and wound up getting on with the all-cargo airline, the Flying Tiger line, which was later bought by Federal Express, that little small package airline that no one thought would make it except Fred Smith.
Yeah.
But
flying that otter in Vietnam, you were above the ground, and
God bless the ground pounders and the Marines and Special Forces guys, because they had it so rough. All my so-called combat was up in the air. I never had to witness a buddy die before me. You know, all my friends just took off and never came back. Different kind of emotion. But I think you and I, for Vietnam veterans, were very lucky.
We were.
You were there, 14 months?
I was, yes. I literally extended so I could get right out of the Army and get back to United. So I extended until March of '69. Got home in time for the moon landings and courting my girlfriend and Terry, and then wound up driving a truck. I literally, because United, my job had moved down to Dulles Airport down by Washington, D.C., and I wasn't smart enough to buy property down there. I just said, I don't want to. But I wound up staying in New York, driving a truck, going to college, community college, and then wound up said I got to get full-time college if I'm ever going to catch up with what they need, and wound up going down to Florida, which was a good thing. Terry and I.
Florida's always good. Vic, we're going to have to close out here. We're running out of time, but close us out with this thought right here. You told me that you could hear the Marines taking a hill, and you got so mad about that because what happened after they would take a hill and losing guys?
Well, you know, we could listen to
okay, Pete, we got to close out.
Combat radio. I couldn't control it from where I was, but in the plane. But we could listen on our headsets to what was going on the ground. And
Pete, we got to close out.
It would
Vic,
scare you up.
Yeah.
So I appreciate.
Got to go, Vic. Thank you so much, man. Great interview. Okay.
Thank you for having me, Pete, and the station as well.
Thank you, sir. Bye-bye.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Hi, this is Rocky Blair, former four-time Super Bowl champion with the Pittsburgh Steelers and Vietnam veteran. As a board member, I'd like to talk to you about Warriors to Citizen, a nonprofit organization that helps American heroes, soldiers, police, fire, EMT, and their families recover from the psychological harm caused by career-induced stress. Over the last 20 years, broken relationships have been a major causal factor.
Hello, my name is Colonel Retired Rick White, a United States Army veteran, and I'm the director of the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame. I would like to encourage all Georgia veterans to consider being nominated to the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame. If you are a Georgia...
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Welcome back into the Doctor's Lounge. I'm your host, Dr. Hal Schurz. Each week, myself, alternating weeks with my co-host, Dr. Scott Barber, come to you and bring you the information that doctors are speaking about in doctors' lounges all across the country. The show is brought to you by the Docs for Patient Care Foundation, which is the only physician-led healthcare think tank in the country. Go to our website, www.d4pcfoundation.org. That's D4pcfoundation.org, and contribute generously so that we can do this show and continue to do the work that we do all around the country, trying to influence the behaviors of people who are responsible for making laws that affect each and every one of you. The Docs for Patient Care Foundation fights for the physician-patient relationship and for health care freedom all across the country. So please support the work that we are doing. Today I have a very interesting show that I am excited to be able to be part of. We've got a special guest which I'm going to introduce. We're going to talk today about mental health problems caused by COVID in children, or said another way, COVID-related mental health problems affecting children. And to help with this discussion today, my guest is Dr. Roy Benarroch, a friend of mine. He is a Miami native, a Tulane graduate of Emory Medical School, and a trainee in residency at Emory. He joined a large pediatric practice, Pediatric Physicians, PC, in 1998, which is a Roswell, Georgia pediatric practice that's in the Atlanta area for those of you around the country. And he is also an author. He has written several books on parenting, including Solving Health and Behavioral Problems from Birth through Preschool, and also A Guide to Getting the Best Health Care for Your Child. He's a pediatric expert for WebMD and has created online courses such as Medical School for Everyone and The Skeptic's Guide to Health, Medicine, and the Media, something that is very apropos in today's climate, skepticism about the media. He writes a blog called The Pediatric Insider, which focuses on parenting and healthcare topics in children. And my involvement with Roy, beside him being a referring doctor to me for a long time, is working hand in hand with him in an effort that we put together quite a few years ago here in Atlanta called the Children's Care Network, which is the largest of its kind, cooperative, a clinically integrated healthcare network for children that has well over 1,000 doctors that are involved in it. And Roy serves as the chair of this group. I'm the vice chair, so we work together on this initiative and have done so for quite some time. So without any further ado, let me introduce Roy Benarroch and invite him into the Doctor's Lounge. Good morning, Roy.
Good morning, Hal. Thank you very much for, wow, when I hear you go through all of that, it sounds like I've been so busy, doesn't it?
It sure does. You're an impressive guy.
But I think of myself as first and foremost just a general pediatrician. Been doing it actually close to 25 years now, if you can believe that. And that's really my main job and my main love.
But you
all
are
that other stuff.
But you're very good at taking care of children. You recognize the problems in children, and you are an excellent educator and help parents to understand how to best take care of their children, which in this climate that we are now in is more important than ever.
Well, thank you. I completely agree with you. You know, kids depend mostly on their parents. Of course, other things, communities and schools and nutrition, so many things are important. But really, parents have most of the responsibility, most of the load. They've got the biggest lift, and they're what helps most important in helping keep kids healthy and happy and safe.
And that's a great segue into what we need to talk about today, which is how children are being affected in this COVID environment. It's an issue that people like you and I have recognized for quite some time, and there are a number of factors that are occurring. Some are unavoidable, and others are man-made, but nonetheless, the effect on children is profound. And people like you and I have recognized this for some time, and it's only recently that it appears that the general public, the media, the woke crowd, if you will, are coming up to speed on this issue. There's been a couple of recent articles that we'll talk about a little bit later on in the show that have appeared in mainstream media, such as Time Magazine or U.S. News and World Reports, that are focusing on children's mental health issues, the mental health crisis in children. So, Roy, tell our listeners what effects COVID is having on mental illness in children.
Well, I think, the simplest part of this, which is what we were maybe too focused on for too long, are the physical effects. I mean, COVID, we know in general, the disease COVID is less likely to affect children than adults, less likely to have complications. So that's been known for a while, and that's been, unfortunately, what's kind of led the headlines, right, that kids don't have to worry about COVID and it's not a big deal for kids. And we sort of, the needs of kids were, I think, fair to say, a little bit of an afterthought. But what we've come to realize are more, I suppose, the indirect effects. We're not talking about the viral effects on the brain, which actually are serious, though rare. We're talking more about the way that the changing environment for children, the changing home environment and changing school environment, changing environment in the playgrounds has affected their overall mental health. And it really is profound in many ways, unfortunately.
So you mentioned about the virus itself, which is something that affects everybody, but children, they recover. They rarely require hospitalization, and even more rarely succumb to this disease as opposed to elderly patients. But the I guess silent issue is what it is doing to their mental health, and not being in school is a large part of this. Having to do home school and not necessarily having the resources to be able to succeed is another. Having parents who might have been laid off from work is yet another. The list goes on and on. So what are some of the things that you see in your patients that that you're hearing about that are direct or indirect effects of this pandemic on children?
We're seeing this in a lot of different ways. There are certainly many families who are contacting us whose kids are showing just overt signs of mental illness, symptoms, and we can go into that a little bit more, what sort of things you see when a child has things like depression or an anxiety disorder. And those are diagnoses that, unfortunately, we're having to make more commonly now. But there's also a very large group of kids who are just far more stressed than would be typical, that are disconnected from their friends, are moody, are doing poorly in school. They're lying. They're doing all sorts of things that appropriately cause concern for their parents. And some of them don't necessarily have a mental health diagnosis, but they're certainly struggling. And sometimes parents are bringing them to our attention, specifically, look, my kiddo is doing this, he's not acting like himself. Or sometimes it's kind of indirect. In pediatrics, mental health issues, things like anxiety and loneliness, sometimes manifest by headaches or belly aches or symptoms like dizziness. So sometimes it's more of a physical symptom that drives the visit or the phone call, or the parents are contacting us via the portal, and they'll say, my child is having, just for instance, let's say headaches 6 or 7 times a week. And as you dig into this, and there's more of an evaluation, of course, but sometimes it's turning out that it's the struggles they're having in school and with friends, or sometimes, related to their parent situation. Kids know when their parents are feeling stressed, that maybe parents themselves or grandparents have been ill, or out of work, or having financial troubles. All of that kind of trickles down. We sometimes try to fool ourselves thinking that we can protect our kids from family struggles. We don't tell them that for instance, mom lost her job or something like that. But, the kids, they know it. They figure out what's going on. They might not get all the details, but they can tell that their parents are in trouble or their family life is different, and they feel that stress, they absorb that stress, and it comes out in different ways.
This is interesting, because there was a panel that was convened, which it was held by a number of children's mental health experts, talking about stress, and in U.S. News and World Reports there was an interesting article that said children's mental health crisis could be the next wave in the pandemic. And what they were alluding to is what's been termed adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. And what happens is that children who are stressed release more stress hormones, and that may set the stage for various health conditions that could exist in these individuals for the rest of their lives, and not just mental health issues, but physical issues like cardiovascular issues or other issues that the stress hormones trigger. And so I think that this is something that's really underappreciated by many doctors who are not tuned into the mental health issues in children.
Now, this is another very, very big issue. Research into the long-term effect of these adverse childhood experiences. It actually began, I think it's interesting, from the adult literature, actually, from studies that were looking at adults who were struggling with obesity specifically. That was how it actually started, which is a huge problem, right? A big problem for adults, and a big drain on the public health system as well. So many morbidities are related to obesity. And researchers were looking, trying to predict what people end up struggling with obesity, and is there a way to prevent it? And this was researched decades ago, actually, that going backwards, they found a very high proportion that these adults had adverse childhood experiences years ago, decades previously, and it seemed to predict continued struggles with obesity. Actually, research since then has linked the same adverse childhood experiences, not just to obesity, though, but to mental health disorders, depression, anxiety, but also to physical disorders, as you said, things like the increased risk of heart attacks and hypertension, diabetes, almost any chronic illness you look at that affects adults can be traced, at least to some degree, as having a contribution to these adverse childhood experiences. Now, COVID itself, of course, is new, and there isn't any long-term data now looking at kids who lived through the era of COVID, but the same sorts of experiences that have been linked to long-term poor health in adults are the same kinds of things that are going on now in the era of COVID. And it's going to take a long time to sort it out, but I fear that there is going to be something here, that this year or year and a half or however long it turns out to be of disruption and closing schools and the many other things that have changed kids' lives will have some very, very long-term effects on their health.
So that's very interesting point, Roy, because closing schools, something that the experts now agree should not have been done, but yet is still going on in many parts of the country, going into the second year. This is, I think, a misguided policy, most would believe, and the repercussions, what these so-called do-gooders are going to cause in terms of the effects on these children and society as a whole. We talk about the effects on each individual, but the cumulative effects on our society, on our healthcare system, are almost immeasurable, wouldn't you say?
Well, I don't want to paint this as an overly black and white issue. I think there's still research to be done, and I'm going to disagree with you a little bit on a blanket statement that closing the schools was definitely a mistake.
Okay.
Especially as the pandemic was unfolding and it wasn't really clear who the vectors were, who was spreading it. I think that specific school closures. Now, in retrospect, I think it could have been done differently and should have been done differently. But, we have to make decisions based on the data that we have.
Right.
And I think it was certainly reasonable to do some school closures. Mm-hmm. And I could actually see that in the future, and there will be a future, and we probably need to talk about that, the next pandemic that will occur, specific school closures may have to be part of the solution. Because when kids congregate inside buildings, they really are apt to spread viral infections. Now, it turns out that COVID is a little different from flu, though. It's not spread among children as efficiently as flu, as we know that now. And I think if we're going to pursue school closures as part of a strategy, it should be done much more specifically, individually, individual neighborhoods with very specific sort of guidelines, at this rate of transmission, et cetera. I don't want to get caught up in the weeds, but I would say that, school closures aren't necessarily, let's say, always a bad thing. Mm-hmm. Now, in retrospect, I think they were done too broadly, and I think it is true that at this point they're being done for too long a time in too many neighborhoods. I guess maybe one glimmer of good news, one good lesson. I'm kind of overall an optimist. I will say we did learn that it is possible, at least in the short run, to close schools and introduce distance learning. If, for instance, there's a classroom that has an outbreak, that classroom should be closed. Those kids should be sent home for perhaps a few weeks. And we know that we can have the flexibility to do that. What I think has led to mischief and unfortunately, some long-term problems are going to be these big, broad, send the kids home, keep them home for a year, not provide the kind of support they use, not provide the technology they need to be successful, and treating all of the families the same. You might have some families in a school district whose parents are in ill health or who are especially at high risk of COVID, and having the option for some families for their kids to remain at home, I think, was appropriate. But again, the overly broad approach, that I think we could have done a better job. I would certainly agree with that.
My guest today is Dr. Roy Benaroch, Atlanta area pediatrician, and I would say an expert on behavioral issues in children. We're talking about the effects of COVID on the mental health of our nation's children. Roy, how do parents know that they should be concerned about a mental health problem in their children? This predates COVID. I mean, mental health issues in children has been an issue that has received very, very little attention. But I think that now it's been magnified because of COVID, and I think that awareness is now beginning to be amplified about some of these effects on children. But if you're a parent, what are some of the you mentioned this earlier, but some of the warning signs: anxiety, sadness. What are some things that, as a parent, might prompt me to call you and say I'm worried about my child because?
To me, the quickest, simplest answer, the simplest one-word answer that I share with parents is the word changes. Mm-hmm. That concept, that observation, my child has changed. So kids have their own temperament, and some are always a little bit more anxious than others. Some are more outgoing. Some toddlers have more tantrums than others, and parents get to know their kids, right? Right. But the word that perks up my ear is something like my child has changed. Mm-hmm. So for instance, a big change in mood that wouldn't be usual for your own child. So they become much more irritable. They become much more hopeless. They become perhaps much more angry. They're frequently fighting with their friends or with their family in a way that's very different from the way it used to be. Perhaps it could be changes in relationships. So they're stepping back from their friends. They're no longer keeping in touch with their friends. They have little interest in the sort of hobbies or social groups that they used to have. A child who, let's say, used to be a big reader had just stopped. They're not interested anymore. Or they stopped interested. They no longer draw. They no longer do art, something like that. Big change. Sometimes they're more physical changes, too, or changes in routine, like a hard time falling asleep or staying asleep, or sleeping all the time. Actually, the opposite, sleeping way, way too much. He never used to be like this, but now he's always in his room. He's always asleep. I would also think about changes in eating patterns. If he only will pick at his food, he doesn't eat anymore, or the opposite, actually. Gaining a tremendous amount of weight, eating all the time can be a manifestation of internal stress. So those are kind of the things that I point out that I want parents to look for, changes in the normal baseline of how their child behaves.
And you mentioned a number of physical things. There, just for the parents who are listening to this podcast, it can be other physical things as well, correct? Like headaches or stomach aches, rashes, things that are manifestations of stress. But some of the other things that parents that we've seen in increasing numbers in children, which are now increasing in this environment, are things that are gigantic red flags, like alcohol use or drug use, correct?
Absolutely right. Now, those tend to be, in a sense, more obvious. Parents recognize that that's a big problem, but of course that's something that brings kids to my office. Some teenagers have always dabbled. For instance, marijuana is sometimes in the schools, or vaping and things like that, and but some of the kids are truly becoming dependent. They're using substances as an escape or as a way to essentially treat their own stress, their own anxiety. They seek these things out because, at least in the short run, it helps them feel better. Unfortunately, these substances are easy to get your hands on. In some communities, they're legal, at least for adults, and so that sends a little bit of a mixed message. There's certainly not a healthy way for our teenagers to deal with rough times.
And many times these substances exist in the house already because parents have them in their medicine cabinets.
Sure, yeah. And the medicine cabinet is an important point that kids, teenagers, will sometimes help themselves. And parents really need to keep an eye on the prescriptions that they have. I believe, in fact, the most common source of opiates that teenagers sometimes will find, we're talking here about sort of painkillers that dull the mind, is from their parents' own house, from their parents' medicine cabinet, or from the homes of friends and relatives. That's where many people are getting hooked or getting started.
So beside a change that the parents might sense, are there any warning signs that you hear that when you're talking to your patients or to the parents of your patients, things that are other red flags to you, bells and whistles going off that say to you, we need to get some help for your child?
Well, when I talk to the kids, and of course, I'll ask the parents to step outside if the child is comfortable with that. I ask pretty direct questions about what's been on their mind, what have they been thinking about, and some of these kids are thinking about suicide or thinking about harming themselves or harming other people.
Yes.
Some of these kids actually have come up with a plan. And when I talk about that with my patients, I remain very, very bland. I don't want to increase the anxiety of the room. But thoughts about suicide, or especially a specific plan, is a huge red flag that immediate intervention is needed. Unfortunately, suicide is something that is a common cause of death among teenagers, one of the top causes of death. Many homes have guns or have pills or other sorts of things that in just a few moments of poor impulse control, which I think all of our teenagers have to some degree.
Not just teenagers.
Very, very tragic outcome. Not just teenagers. That's true. So certainly among rules up there at the top, first things families need to do if they have a teen or even a preteen, that there's concerns about depression, there's concerns about mood and irritability, to get those guns out of the house, or if you just can't stand to do that, make sure they're locked up separately from the ammunition, and realize that your teenagers know the security code for your gun safe. They know it. They're very, very smart. So please change that code. Even if you think, they don't even know there's guns in the house. Well, guess what? They do know, and they know how to get their hands on them. So let's make sure, at the very least, first steps, let's protect them from the sorts of things that can cause immediate harm.
Well, you know, I want to get in the next segment. I want to get a little bit deeper into this suicide issue, which is, I think, epidemic right now. It's become, you know, a major problem that has been amplified because of COVID. And we're gonna do, I think, a lightning round. I'm going to mention some issues, and I'm going to ask you to respond to them. And finally, I'm going to ask you to maybe share some specific instances of patients that, without naming names, about what kind of issues you've recognized and how you've been able to intercede. So I'm going to ask everybody to stay with us in this very important episode of the Doctor's Lounge.
The Docs for Patient Care Foundation is your way to join the fight and become a member of an organization created by doctors for patients dedicated to fighting for your healthcare freedom and preserving the doctor-patient relationship. Get a pen and paper. Write down www.docsforpatientcarefoundation.org. That's www.docsforpatientcarefoundation.org. Go to our site and please make a generous tax-deductible donation and join the fight today. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dr. Mike Karuchak. Join me and my co-host, Dr. Hal Schertz, every Thursday morning at 8 a.m. and listen to the Doctor's Lounge, where you get a private insight into the conversations that doctors have amongst themselves. Join us Thursday, 8 a.m. every week.
In 2009, the membership organization Docs for Patient Care was founded. People all around the country wanted to participate in the efforts of this group, and they wanted to join, but they were unable to do so unless they were physicians. It's for this reason that the Docs for Patient Care Foundation was created. Now, everyone can join the fight and become a member of an organization created by doctors for patients, dedicated to fighting for your healthcare freedom and preserving the doctor-patient relationship. While you're at your computer, please go to www.docs4patientcarefoundation.org. That's www.docs4patientcarefoundation.org and make a tax-deductible donation and join the fight along with us. Thank you.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Welcome back into the Doctor's Lounge. I'm your host, Dr. Hal Schertz. My guest today is Dr. Roy Benaroch, Atlanta area pediatrician, mental health expert in children, and someone who works tirelessly at trying to educate parents about the well-being of children in his practice and those who aren't, by virtue of the work he does, writing his blogs and on the internet and heading the Children's Care Network, which is the largest of the integrated healthcare systems in pediatrics in the country. Roy, we have had a very interesting conversation thus far about the effect of COVID on mental health in children, how parents could recognize these problems if their children are experiencing issues, what you look for as a pediatrician to try to uncover issues that may be causing problems for these children. But I think that the worst of all problems that can occur in a family is when a child decides to take their life, suicide. And this has really become a national epidemic, hasn't it?
Yeah. It's really quite sad, but unfortunately rates of both successful suicide, that's a terrible word to use, but let's say completed suicide is probably a better term, or thoughts of suicide, attempted suicide have all increased quite dramatically in terms of presentation to emergency departments and to mental health professionals and to generalists like myself. I'm a general pediatrician, but there's a big intersection there between the work that I do to help kids with mental health disorders and psychiatrists and psychologists in the field.
There are not enough pediatric mental health experts. That's why all pediatricians need to become mental health experts. Wouldn't you agree?
That is 100% true. Mental health issues were something that was not really a focus of my training, which was 25 years ago, but it has been a huge part of my practice and therefore has become a huge part of my ongoing training. So that's something that I spend a lot of weekend courses and reading and all this sort of thing so I can stay up on this. Both recognition of mental health disorders and treatment, because we just don't have the resources to refer kids to. There aren't enough psychologists, there aren't enough psychiatrists. The kids are hurting, the families need help, so often pediatricians and family medicine physicians are stepping in. And I think, we're doing a good job helping, but we do need more support, and we certainly can't do it on our own.
This show that I do every week is I would like to think is it's a resource. It's a privilege to be able to do this. And I think today's show is very important because there are going to be parents who are listening to this show who may have a child that they're worried about, and I think that they need to make sure that their child is connected with a doctor who takes these issues seriously. And I know that in the integrated network that you are the chair of, the vice chair of, it's a primary concern. It's something that many resources are being directed towards to try to improve how we respond to children with mental health issues. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Yes, this has been recognized for years at the level of our offices, from parents. I mean, we know this has been a crisis from well before COVID, honestly. So really one main focus of our integrated care network is improving the mental health of our children in several levels, too. We're trying to get very, very robust data, right? The way to make best decisions is if you know what the problems are. And actually, I pulled some data I can share with you if you're curious just yesterday about what's going on in our network with mental health.
That would be great.
Yeah. You know what? Let's go through that. I want to talk more about the other efforts we have, but one of the things that we're able to do with the clinical network is have our clinicians, about 1,300 plus pediatricians and pediatric specialists in the network, and we all share our data. Now, this is all anonymous, of course. We definitely protect the identity of our patients, but we can look at surveys, we can look at large numbers, and I just pulled this with the help of the staff yesterday, actually, and to make it simple, I was comparing numbers just between 2019 and 2020 as sort of a handy shorthand. 2019, of course. Does anyone remember 2019?
No.
That was pre-COVID. Remember that? And then comparing the numbers to 2020, of course, COVID probably appeared around December 2019, and by, the end of February 2020, is that about when shutdowns occurred? February, March, I want to say.
Yes, about March.
So I just looked at 2019 versus 2020, and just to share some round numbers, you're looking at, let's see, let me pull this one. Let me look at anxiety disorders. So those are things like generalized anxiety and phobias and social anxiety. The rate of those diagnoses, comparing the 2 years, was up, depending on the specific diagnosis, the increase was between 60 and 200%, actually, for some of the individual diagnoses, doubled across those 2 years. Depression was up, again, depending on the exact diagnosis, but just as a round number, up by about 100% as well. It about doubled. And even just visits to discuss the concerns, visits concerning concerns of anxiety increased on our whole network from 27,000 to 46,000. That's not quite double, but it's a huge jump. Concerns of depression depressive symptoms went from 20,000 visits to 30,000 visits. I'm just throwing out a couple of examples. It's a big page of numbers I have here, but this is solid, hard data that's showing that in a year where overall our visits decreased dramatically, we saw far fewer visits in 2020. That's an effect of kids staying home and parents being afraid to leave the house. Even in the face of far fewer visits, a very large jump in visits for mental health concerns. And this was actually starting before COVID. These trends had actually begun before COVID. So we've got the data to prove it, and there's some publications that have been made recently, not from my network, I'll admit, but from other centers. What we're trying to do, we provide the data, we're trying to support sort of the infrastructure so that pediatric specialists and pediatricians can provide mental health support using tools like telehealth. We're trying to support appropriate reimbursement from the payers for us to have the time to address these mental health disorders. And in the long run, I think the best thing that we can do, and what we're working very hard at, is trying to improve access so kids have access to not only their primary care physicians, but mental health specialists like psychiatrists and therapists and social workers. There's all sorts of barriers in place, but through networks like ours, hopefully we can connect families to the resources they need.
Roy, has the lack of adequate reimbursement for these problems been a barrier for treatment for children who have these problems?
Wow, that's kind of kicking a hornet's nest, I would say. For years and years, let's just say for a variety of reasons, mental health has been kind of carved out from the usual medical system we have. You see separate providers, the reimbursement rates are separate and lower, and this has been going on for a long time. This has been a source of frustration that's just coming to a head because the need has increased so dramatically. The bottom line, though, is, if you want to have good access to mental health providers, you have to pay the mental health providers appropriately. Many don't even accept insurance plans because the reimbursement is minuscule and not worth the hassle of filing. And, that might not be a huge problem for wealthy families or families in the suburbs who have a large number of providers around them, but it especially hard for families who are economically disadvantaged. They've been just clobbered both by COVID, by the mental health disorders that accompany it, and sort of any way you look at it, the underrepresented, disadvantaged families, they I don't know how else to put it. They just take it in the shorts. They get hit much harder, and they're the kids who in some ways need it most. So we need to provide these services both for everybody, for wealthy families, for families that have, quote, good insurance, but also for families who have no insurance or have public insurance. It's a problem for everyone. In the long run, we're going to end up paying for this, so we might as well try to intervene when the kids are young.
We're paying for it already, and
exactly right. We're paying for it. We're paying for it, unfortunately, through increased emergency department visits. That is the most expensive and worst place to offer mental health. Now let me back up for a second. I don't want to say worst place. For the families who are listening, if you have a crisis, if your child has attempted suicide or is talking about suicide, please have no hesitation to go directly to the closest emergency department. Okay, the emergency departments can take care of you, and I'm glad they're open. But in retrospect, often there was a way to intervene before going to the emergency. Not always, but usually there were hints. Usually there were issues that were creeping up, that were snowballing, and it would have been better if access could have been there for a mental health provider before the emergency room was necessary. So I don't want to scare parents away from the emergency department. That's the best place to be when you really need it. But what we have to do is make it so that families don't need to rely on the emergency department, which is very, very expensive and, frankly, a terrible use of mental health resources.
I hate to keep bringing this back to school closures, but so much of what we're talking about, so many of these problems can be directly tied to school closures because much of this support for many of these families actually comes through the experiences that these children get in school, whether it is nutrition, the lunch that they may not be able to get at home because there's a food shortage crisis, or the counseling that many of these children get at school, which is no longer available to them. So I think that we need to learn from this that that if there's ever another pandemic or emergency, that we need to understand that maybe the most vulnerable people in our society are the children. They're not the most resilient, and they often get overlooked.
Yeah. I would also add to your list of important resources in school, just the peer networks, just being with their friends that they know and they trust. That's such an important part of a child's life, in addition to the counselors and the teachers and the administrators who provide support in the schools. You're right. In their own way, kids can be very resilient, but they shouldn't be an afterthought. I think we were so focused on businesses and restaurants.
And the elderly. Right? The at-risk
and
population.
the elderly. And these are all important. I don't want to sort of take away from how important it was to protect especially the elderly who are at such high risk of complications of COVID. This was complicated. I hope that as things settle down, that we can sort of objectively look back and learn these lessons, which will have to include admitting that some things could have been done better. That's okay. That's how we learn. That's how we grow. And we've got to put kids and their needs right up there, not on the back burner, not as an afterthought, but kids and schools should be really quite important. And I think the communities are going to want to or should do what they need to do to keep the schools open. That should be what do we need to do in our community so that we don't have to close the schools. Of course, that means keeping the rates of transmission of COVID or whatever the infection you're fighting, keep those community transmissions low. If you can accomplish that, you can keep the schools open very safely. So how do we do that? Well, that's a big question, probably a little beyond what we're going to talk about in the podcast this morning, but that really should be a goal.
Roy, would you feel comfortable sharing a couple of specific examples with our listeners about problems that you've uncovered, diagnosed, and how you've intervened?
Yeah, I think that can be illustrative. I need to be a little bit careful, of course. I don't want to cross any lines in terms of privacy. These are very difficult issues for families, and I want teenagers and my patients to feel that they can share things with me. Let me tell you a story. This may come across a little hesitant because I'm going to deliberately change a lot of details here. So if I stumble over a word, it's because there's something I don't want to say specifically.
I appreciate
I would
that.
hate for anyone to be able to identify exactly the case I'm thinking about. But this was within, let me just say, within very recent memory, a simple, what I thought was going to be a simple visit was a teenager, a young woman who came in to my office, and actually the complaint, we get what's called a chief complaint, which is why are you here today, was actually allergies. That was what the nurse had put in there, and that's what it said when they made the appointment. And they were given appropriately a simple 15-minute allergies, common this time of year, right, in Atlanta where we are. But the girl, she was looking down at her feet, and she really kept mentioning this headache. Now, the family was honestly convinced that the headache was being caused by congestion and allergies, which isn't a bad idea. It may have been. But as we talked about it, she really wasn't having the ordinary symptoms of allergies, the itchy nose and sneezing and rubbing the nose and congestion and things like that. What she really had were headaches. And although she had resumed, actually, she had been in virtual school but was now back to face-to-face, she was staying home because these headaches were keeping her at home. And we talked for a little while, and as I often do with teenagers, I said, let's keep talking with it. How would you feel if your mom and dad stepped outside? They had actually both accompanied her. The mom and the dad, this was a family where both parents were very involved, were very caring, where they certainly wanted to do the best for their child. So they did step out, and then I talked to her, and then a few tears fell, and without sort of going into the details here, she had been super worried about a relative who had gotten sick with COVID, but she didn't want her parents to worry about her. Right, that was a big. She was trying to protect her parents because she knew they were already upset about this relative, and she was going to school, but she felt that she had missed so much school that she was having trouble keeping up, and she was having trouble focusing, and really the root of all of this was anxiety, and she had even crossed that bridge. I asked her, this sounds like it's been so rough for you. Are there times when you think of hurting yourself? And she had actually come up with a very, very specific plan. In fact, she told me the only reason she hadn't completed the plan was she was worried about how her parents would react. She didn't want her parents to worry. And that was the only thing that was, to say it bluntly, that was essentially keeping her alive. Her parents were trying to protect her. She was trying to protect her parents. Everybody was worried, and she was essentially non-functional when thinking about school and her friends. So, there wasn't really a very specific diagnosis here. This was a matter of then bringing the parents together with permission from the child, of course. Let's talk about this together. Can I bring your parents back in the room? I think we'll all feel better if we can get this out in the open. And I actually did not end up referring them for mental health. I didn't start in medicine. It wasn't about that. It was about opening communication. And then I actually saw her again just a few days later, and I talked to her on the phone a few times, and we've made arrangements for further telehealth. In the long run, I do therapy for anxiety might be helpful for her, but we were able to come through the crisis by just having a conversation. And I think it helped that I was someone they knew and trusted, and so I think that was powerful for the family. So a 15-minute appointment that had been driven by a concern of allergies turned into really quite a long encounter, but I was happy to do it. I mean, I think I was able to help and hopefully prevent a terrible crisis. By the way, let me just make a brief plug here because I mentioned it. For those of you who sometimes get frustrated at my office or at your doctor's office at the wait, we do not like to make you wait, believe me. But when it is your child in a crisis and they need 20 or 30 or 40 minutes of my extra time, I'm going to sit there in a chair and I'm not going to rush, and I'm going to get through the encounter and do everything I can to help them, even though it means the next few visits I'm going to be running late and people are going to wait. But I'm going to be there for you when you need my extra time too, I promise. So anyway, a little bit of a tangent there, but I did get some anger from the parents who came after me. And I know, Hal, as a specialist, you've had to deal with that too, right?
Yes. I always want to tell a parent, that's okay, we'll make up the time on your child.
Yeah. Well, and I'll you know what? Even if I'm already running behind, if you need my extra time, this is my job. This is when I'll be here. And people do sometimes have to wait, but I don't know of any way to know in advance exactly how much time I'm going to need. And certainly this family didn't realize that that's where this encounter was going to go, that they would be spending essentially an hour sitting and just chatting with Dr. Roy. That's all we did. We sat and talked, and I didn't prescribe medicine. I didn't order any tests, but hopefully I was able to help these people out. And these are the kinds of encounters that are coming up, I would even say several times a week in my office with kids and families near or at crisis levels in a way that sometimes sneaks up on people.
Wow, this has just opened up a whole thought process for me. This story, which I appreciate you sharing. It's heartbreaking, the hopelessness that this child had, and so many children obviously have, and the fact that they had a great pediatrician in you who recognized that this was a problem. How many pediatricians might not recognize this because they are trying to rush through a busy schedule, and they don't really think about what else might be going on or causing these problems. And that to me is really something that I shudder to think about. All these I don't know, these cases of hopelessness and going to extremes that are being missed.
I fear there is quite a bit of that. Often manifest by physical symptoms, headaches and belly aches, or loneliness and isolation are so powerful, and it's affecting the kids and it's affecting the families. That's for sure. And I think that physicians and nurses and all of us who interact with patients, really all along the chain, need to keep in mind that there's kids out there who really need our help. Even in your office, even as a urologist, I'm sure you've seen kids recently who have urologic symptoms, urinary frequency or pain that may actually have a psychological or may be related to stress. And I think all of us are invested in the health of children and need to keep in mind that even if we don't feel that we're personally able to treat a mental health disorder, to at least recognize it and refer, let families know that there is help available, and help people get plugged in with the resources they need.
Do you think that these issues are now being recognized and getting enough publicity, recognition, airtime, or do we need to do a better job?
No, we need to do better, truthfully. I think it's getting more airtime. There was quite a bit of attention in the last few weeks. There was a recent study in JAMA. It was the JAMA Open Access Journal out of Chicago that illustrated how frequently mental health concerns and mental health symptoms were occurring. And that, I think, received a fair amount of press. I saw an article, I think you sent me the article from Time on that study.
Yes.
So there is attention, but I think that kids, I'm a pediatrician, I'll admit, maybe a little bit biased, but I think kids' needs really do need to be right up front. They really do need to come first. And there are ways that we can intervene earlier by providing the support they need, where the kids don't have to end up in a crisis. And part of that is appropriate support at school, to circle back to that topic. So I think more attention is needed. I think that lawmakers need to help make sure that that resources are available. As we're thinking about these, and we don't have to get into them.
Come to realize that children are at the bottom of the list, because there's no constituency for children. They don't contribute money. There's nobody lobbying for them. And so that's why they, unfortunately, are an afterthought in so many ways. And, again, not to get political, I'm trying my best not to. I often do on this show. But I don't think that the teachers use
in the classroom.
I agree with that.
I think that they're trying to do their best.
I completely agree with that.
Yeah.
It sounds like pediatricians can do a better job as well by educating themselves and staying on top of things. And unfortunately for people like you, your job becomes harder and longer, because you can. The thing that we've learned from this pandemic is that the clock no longer exists because of the communication aspect of things. And so there, whereas your job might end at 5 o'clock, it no longer ends at 5 o'clock. It's really never ending, and the ability to reach out to your patients, there can be really no limits to what is the demands on your time.
Well, that is true. Although I don't necessarily mind that. I do call my parents in the evenings or on my way home from work and things like that. When people need me, I'd like to feel that I can make the time to be available. But the mental health of healthcare providers, I think, has to some degree suffered during this pandemic. In my office, we're not struggling with PPE. We have seen, of course, some kids with COVID in the office, but I'm not an ICU physician or an ER physician or an ICU nurse. But boy, let me just hats off to the especially ED and ICU
I agree.
People working in there, the nurses, the respiratory tech. They have worked their tails off.
I agree. I'm going to cut you off, Roy, because we're coming up to the end, and I want to thank you for being on the show, and I want you to have an opportunity to tell people how they can see you on your blog.
Thank you, Hal. Yes, my blog is at pediatricphysicians.com. We had talked a little bit about suicide. I actually have a very brief, it's only 45 minutes video course on the recognition and of suicide risk, focusing not only on kids, on teenagers, but on adults. That's available at the Great Courses or at the Great Courses Plus. That's a commercial product, but it's not very expensive, I promise. And it's very, very short, talking about the warning signs of suicide and what we all can do to recognize and help people who are at risk. So I hope that will be helpful for people.
Please go to that because Dr. Roy has a lot of excellent information for parents out there. And I want to thank everyone in the Doctor's Lounge today, my guest, Dr. Roy Benarock, and come back next week and join my partner, Dr. Scott Barber, on the Doctor's Lounge.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
The Docs for Patient Care Foundation is your way to join the fight and become a member of an organization created by doctors for patients, dedicated to fighting for your healthcare freedom and preserving the doctor-patient relationship. Get a pen and paper. Write down docs4patientcarefoundation.org. That's DOCS, the number 4, patientcarefoundation.org. Go to our site and
I'm the director of the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame.
For Locked and Loaded on America's Web Radio.
Listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
It's 1 o'clock. We are in America's Web Radio. It's from Atlanta, Georgia.
America. United States of America.
Yes. And this is...
Let's Talk Venezuela, the English version.
Yes, Let's Talk Venezuela, the English version. Here we are with the legend, David Moxley and Brett. How you been, both of you, my friends?
Good, thank you. Bien, gracias.
Love it, love it, love it.
Yeah, in a few months, David will be in charge of the Spanish version of Let's Talk Venezuela. Hablemos venezolano.
I don't blame you, David. I don't blame you. You know that Spanish language is one of the hardest language to learn because it has so many words that it means the same thing, like 6, 7, synonyms. So
back when I was going to school, I thought I wanted to go pre-med, but I looked at Latin, and back then you couldn't go pre-med unless you could speak Latin or knew Latin.
Yeah.
And talking about a hard language, and I'm not even good at Spanish, much less Latin.
Yeah, I remember when I was taking anatomy classes and all those back in, 40 years ago? Yeah, the names used to be in Latin, the name of the body parts and all that.
Please don't mention Christ in front of Satan.
Yeah, so Carlos, what's news?
Well, the first news is that the former Vice President of Venezuela, of the Bolivarian Republican of Venezuela.
Republic.
Yeah.
Okay.
Aristóbulo Istúriz, Pelo Gajo, I mean,
Oh, he passed
away.
Oh my God! You know, somebody
Okay.
sent me a video of his funeral.
Yeah.
We're talking about Venezuela, you know.
Yes.
Our Venezuela way of doing funeral is mostly
Solemn.
very solemn.
With jokes.
Yeah, but it has to be hush hush, like quiet.
Yes, quiet.
Okay?
Respectful.
Respectful. The priest supposed to be there, you know. Some come once in a
Yes.
while.
Yeah.
There were ladies from the church. I'm talking about the Catholic Church because remember,
Yes.
Venezuela official religion is
No, there is not official religion,
But-
but in 85% of the population
Venezuela
follows-
population are Catholic.
follows, the Catholic.
Yeah, so there is El Rosario. How do you say Rosario in English?
It's rosary.
The Rosary, and you know the prayer time, and people come and hug the wife and the family, you know,
You know,
and a lot of coffee for the night time. A lot
Yeah.
of coffee, drinking a lot of coffee, you know, to be awake with the family, and usually it's very solemn, very you know.
Yeah, very
But
respectful.
this funeral that I watch on TV, on the video that they sent me on my cell phone,
Uh-huh.
it was all the opposite. I had never seen something
people
like that.
People dancing in front of the coffin. It was something that they say, okay, this guy was so bad
But it was
that
not-
the people was dancing in front of him. Yeah, he died, you know.
Yeah, but the music that was playing there was not a Venezuelan music.
It was the African music of
Exactly,
Barlovento
the African.
because he was from a zone with a zone named Curiepe, okay, and but it's the second vice president
Pelagajo?
who Pelagajo who passed away. Okay,
And
Pelagajo.
Barlovento is a place in Venezuela, in the coast of Venezuela.
In the coast of
And
Venezuela,
majority
yes,
people who live in there are
are blacks.
so they are descended from the slave back in those days.
Yes.
They came
yes.
from Africa, so
Yes,
they
that-
continue with their
That was the zone where
culture,
the-
right?
Yeah, that was the zone where the first blacks came to Venezuela. Long before in United States we have slaving, because remember that the enslavement history in United States began with a black man, with an Angolian, who took another black man as a slave from Africa. Yes. So that's
the one who started the slavery in America was a black man.
was a black man. Yes.
So, but when we say things like that, a lot of people don't like that narrative, right?
Because there is some kind of shame on that matter, you know. But the history is history, and you cannot
change it.
You cannot change it. The thing is that the people of Barlovento, they are direct descendants of the Africans.
So
And,
those people in Barlovento, they are still keeping their culture like from Africa, like the music, the religion.
Yes, they have in Venezuela. The Spaniards did not change the culture of the blacks. Okay,
They
so
didn't force them to convert them to.
yes, they converted, and there is a religious syncretism. Syncretism is the mixing of one religion with others. So the blacks, the thing that they did is that they changed the name of their gods in the Yoruba region, and they changed the name, but it's basically the same religion that they used to have in Africa. Remember that the black Africans, the people who were enslaved in Africa, were captured by Muslims.
Yeah.
Okay, and the Muslim, basically black Muslims, they were the guys who who enslaved
Sorry.
the other blacks and sold that people to basically to the Portuguese. That has the license to trade with black people.
Well, the Muslim, they are still practicing slavery today. They are
Yes.
never, because it's part of the religion. When somebody doesn't convert to the religion, they have only like 3 options if they want to be alive. And then option number 4 is they kill you if you don't, like beheading and all that stuff. One way of keeping you alive in their territory is by a person who doesn't want to convert is paying like some kind of taxes, right? Very
Yes.
high taxes. And the second is
the taxes is named the jazia.
the jazia. Okay, and the
Okay.
second option for them to
But
live,
that's only applied to the people of the book. That
to the
means
Jews.
to the Jewish, to the Jews and the Christians.
And the Christian. Okay.
Okay,
And
but
the
they
other
are
way,
but they are considered servants.
the other way is they're considered like servant.
Yeah.
And then the other way for somebody to be alive is becoming a slave.
Yeah.
Buying you and selling you as a slave.
Yes.
And you are like an animal for them. You're not worth
Yeah,
nothing. And the other way is
But congratulations, because last year Mula said that the women right now are from the they're now an animal. Before they were not considered even like an animal.
oh Lord.
Okay.
Well, that's the thing about that religion, right? The culture, religion, and everything
Yeah.
together. So, when we're talking about the Yoruba area, right?
The Yoruba
area is a 3 large ethnic group in Nigeria,
exactly.
concentrated in the southwestern part of the country.
Yeah, it's the belly of Africa.
Yeah, the one that mixed with the African, with the American continent.
Yes,
that goes like this.
exactly.
Okay. All right. So he passed away. His name is Aristobulo.
Aristobulus Turis.
Turis.
And his memory won't be remembered.
I was talking to my friend. I told her, hey, Aristobulo, did you watch the video? Aristobulo passed away. She said, I don't want to even see that. He killed my uncle. And she's Venezuelan. She's here.
Wow.
And she said, I don't want to know anything about him. He killed my uncle.
It would be very interesting to have an interview with this lady.
Yeah, to find out what happened with him, right?
Yes. But this is the second vice president that passed away this year. The first was Jose Memiente Rangel.
Jose Vicente Rangel.
That one, okay. So there is the second vice president during this period of this dark period of the Venezuelan history that passed away. Many people is saying, okay, who will be the next vice president?
Nobody wants to be the vice
president. And the thing is, next, hey, Diosdado, are you ready? Are you ready, Diosdado? Okay. But that's life, and we hope that this situation with the socialism in Venezuela will be over. I don't know when, but I hope that will be soon, because during this week there is the Economist, the magazine, English magazine, published the index of poverty in the world. But it's not poverty, it's pauper. It's what is the country that is number one to be the poorest of the poorest,
like a miserable.
The miserable, and Venezuela won.
Venezuela is the number one.
Venezuela.
Not even Zimbabwe?
No, Zimbabwe is 6 times richer than Venezuela right now.
Oh, Lord.
Okay? and the thing is, in order you to have an idea, the minimum wage in Venezuela right now is around $3 a month.
$3 a month.
Yes, the United Nations consider a poor country any country that lives with a wage of $1 per day. Okay, Venezuela has a minimum wage of $3 a month. That means around 10 cents or 10% of what is considered poverty. Okay?
So being such a rich country and today is the worst of the worst?
Yes. Yes. It's sad, but you know something is the end result of the most scientific system, political system that exists in the world. Okay? Any time you implemented socialism, at the end of the line, the thing that you got is not poverty. It's
misery.
Below misery.
It's misery.
It's misery. So the other day, somebody showing the Facebook a can of Diablitos. Okay.
Diablitos is like
the underhood devil ham.
Okay.
Okay, and he said we were raised with arepas with diablitos. It was a very common thing.
I remember, yeah.
Okay, and I told him, listen, in that can, you now have a month worth of work in Venezuela
to buy that little can.
That little can.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
So that's how bad the situation is in Venezuela. But anyway, you know, you have that thing where the 95% of the population lives, but there is another 5% of the population that are connected with the government, okay, and with the power, who has houses in the best places in not only in Venezuela. There are a lot of people connected to the government, the Venezuela government, that has apartments in Brickell Avenue or in Paris or whatever. Okay, you also have...
So what you're saying is that socialism in Venezuela works very good for some people, but it's terrible for the 80% of the population of the
95%.
country.
The proportion
okay.
is what they say, the 3%. Okay, the 3% of the population lives like kings. It's like a medieval times. Okay, where the royalty lives like royalties, and the rest of the people were just peasants and servants, you know. And the thing is that stage already reached Venezuela. 95% of the population, 3% are the government's people who travel in their own jets, who had Ferraris and Lamborghinis, okay, who has big yachts, okay, and the other 2% are the people who are near of that people, serving that people, okay, and the rest of the population lives, you know, just waiting for the government to solve their problem.
To hang over something to
okay,
them, yeah.
to if there is something, some clap boxes to buy, well, they would buy that clap boxes that requires around 6 or 7 minimum wages, so everybody in their home had to work.
Chip in.
Yes.
Yeah.
In order to
the club boxes is, for those who doesn't know, is a box full of non-perishable food.
Yeah.
Like rice, pasta, oil.
Yeah.
Cans, like something.
Yeah,
in cans.
basically cans.
Yeah, and flour, salt, sugar.
Yes. But the people right now don't even have money to buy the club boxes. So right now, and we will talk about we were talking about that before. For example, Maduro gave for the May 1st. Gave the 2 euros as a minimum salary in
2 euros.
2
euros.
Yes. That's
how much is 1 euro?
It's $1.2.
$1.20.
20 cents.
So he gave people $2.40, not even $2.50.
No.
To Venezuelan a month, so they can live.
Yes.
And the club box costs $6.
Yeah, around $8.
So if in a house, let's say 6 people live in a house, they have to chip in order to get 1 club box.
Yeah, that happens.
And they have to share it.
That happens with the people who live with a minimum wage. Okay, in Bolívar.
And he says May 1st, because it's a communist day, right?
It's not really. It's the Labor Day in the rest of the world that commemorates an event that happens here in the United States, in Chicago. Okay, and what they said is they remind the thing, because remember, the communists always want United States to be a socialist country, and we've been fighting the fight against socialism since the middle of the 19th century. Okay, so that what it happens right now in the United States is not new. It happens so many times in the U.S. history, with exactly the same results. At the end of the line, socialism is over.
So what you're saying is, you think the United States is going to overcome this situation, what we're going through? So we should not be doing nothing?
No, we have to fight, because remember what Ronald Reagan said. Liberty, freedom is only one generation away to be lost. Okay? The problem is that in Venezuela we have a socialist mentality. We've been with the socialist mentality since the generation of 1928. Okay?
Excuse me.
And
1928.
Yes.
Yeah, that was after General Gomez passed away.
No.
28.
No.
1928.
Sí, yes.
The generation of the 28.
Yes.
When the Adecos,
the generation of 28 is a movement of the Venezuelan Central University with you have names as Gustavo Machado, the founder of the Communist Party, and Romulo Betancourt, studying in that place that is considered a communist nest since that era. Okay, but what happens? Gomez put everybody of that generation even on jail or in exile. Okay, and Venezuela lived a fair.
But it's showing that Venezuela never came out from that crisis. So my question is,
because after the Gomez passing, and this is the kind of discussion that we had before. The guy who took power was López Contreras, and López Contreras, the only merit that had to be the president of Venezuela is that 5 years before he was the Minister of Guerra y Marina, War and Navy. Okay, so he was the guy who in the real power of the guns, you know. So what happened that when Gomez passed away, there were a lot of people who says we need to modernize Venezuela in the administration, blah blah blah. And he said, okay, what's the best country in the world right now that can be served as a model? And remember, it's 1935, 1936, and who was the guy, or who was the model of government that were most successful in that era? It was Germany. And who was in power at that moment? Adolf Hitler. Okay, and what was Adolf Hitler? He was a Nazi, a National Socialist. Okay, so López Contreras, even though he was against Marxism, he saw the model, the militarist model of Hitler. And he was a military, and do you know something? He followed those steps. He created the central bank.
Yeah.
Okay. He created the system of identification, and he creates also the National Guard. And what that means? That means that from that moment, the state took over the riches of the people who had their gold in the banks, and the government expropriated that gold and says now that gold is the reserve of the nation. No, it was the big expropriation of the nation against the riches of the people. Okay, the second thing was the National Guard, that right now in the Venezuelan Constitution appears as the function of the National Guard is to control the population.
Yes.
Okay, and the third part is the creation of the national identification system.
Yeah.
So you have right now in Venezuela, since 1936 on today, you have three things. First, the state took over your money, your riches. Now they can do with the money whatever they please.
They took control of your pocket.
Okay, they took control also of your liberty, because the military are now the real power by constitution against the civil. Okay, we don't have Second Amendment.
In Venezuela, no.
No. Okay.
We don't have the 10 amendments.
we don't have the Bill of Rights in
Not
Venezuela.
even the first one. You think we're gonna have the second?
No. In Venezuela, since 1819, okay, when Bolivar eliminates the Constitution of 1811, okay, in Venezuela we don't have Bill of Rights.
Exactly.
Okay, and the third thing is that you lost also even your identity, because right now the Venezuelan people is just a serial number of the state. It's like we belong to the state instead to be the state belongs to the people. And that's why you have this kind of disaster that right now Venezuela lives. And how can you erase that mentality?
It's like I was everything, that kind of mentality starts at home.
Yes.
It starts at home.
Yes.
For example, when you see a mother taking care of her children, but she's not teaching them how to be independent, responsible, to be a good citizen. No. What she's teaching them is, I am your solution, you depend on me, I'm giving you house, I'm giving you this, I'm giving you this, I'm giving you this. But when those children grow up, they're just waiting for mommy and dad to pass away so they can inherit the house that they have. That's what I saw for many years in Venezuela, right?
No, not only that.
But it started at home. So we're going to go in a break, and we're going to come back.
Okay.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, David. Take it away.
Hi, this is Rocky Blair, former four-time Super Bowl champion with the Pittsburgh Steelers and Vietnam veteran. As a board member, I'd like to talk to you about Warriors to Citizen, a nonprofit organization that helps American heroes, soldiers, police, fire, EMT, and their families recover from the psychological harm caused by career-induced stress. Over the last 20 years, broken relationships have been a major causal factor for the highest documented divorce rate and resulting suicides in this population. This program, From Warriors to Citizen, is delivered free to families by professionals, all whom served in uniform and understand the needs to be addressed. I ask for your support, so please go to our website, warriorstocitizen.org, and find out how you can help, either by making a donation or sharing this information with an American hero that you may know. And thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls of all ages, join me, Roger B., every Tuesday at 1400 hours right here on America's Web Radio for the Locked and Loaded Show. We will talk about guns, weapons, ammo, gun accessories, prepping, and so much more. So be sure to join us every Tuesday at 1400 or 2 p.m. for Locked and Loaded on America's Web Radio.
If you live to serve and want to make an even bigger difference, consider joining the U.S. Army. With training in fields like medical care, linguistics, and engineering, an Army career can amplify your efforts with humanitarian opportunities all over the world. Plus, you'll receive competitive pay and incredible benefits, so you'll be taken care of, too. Learn more at GoArmy.com.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
And this is Let's Talk Venezuelan. And we are talking about the socialism, how the socialism in Venezuela convert Venezuela, one of the most richest countries in the world.
Yeah.
And now is the poorest in the world. And let me explain you something. That means that countries are not rich because they have natural resources. Countries are rich because their GDP and the people work and the people create the riches.
Okay.
And let's talk about the best example of what socialism does. This lady, Margaret Thatcher, used to say that socialism works until the money dries out.
Yeah, but today it's different. They still drying up, but they still in power.
So, what happened? In 1970, the income of the Venezuelan people, and in real numbers, were 10% higher than the United States. Okay? 1970. 51 years ago. Okay? But remember that we had in Venezuela slow motion socialism. Okay?
We call it progressivism.
Exactly.
In a progressive
In
way,
a
slow,
progressive.
and that's what the Democrats comparing Venezuela, what was going on here in America.
Exactly.
That's the same language that Ossoff is using. All these Democrats are using the language of progressivism.
Yes,
Okay?
and you can read what's going on right now in Venezuela, and the best example. It's curious. It's the University Simón Bolívar.
The University Simón Bolívar. Is
Yes.
that a public or private university?
It's a public university, but let me explain you something. In the 1960s, they said, okay, we have the Central University, but we need the best of the best education in this country. Remember that in 1969, the President Caldera closed the UCV for almost 3 years.
The Universidad Central de Venezuela, the Central University of Venezuela.
Yes, it was. They
closed for 3 years.
For 3 years because communists took so many power in that university that the government decided to close it and to check everything that university. They found guns. They found a lot of.
Oh, so the communists always take the universities.
Yes,
that's not something new.
No, it's not new, and that's when Caldera said, okay, let's pacify these people, let's negotiate with the guerrilla, and let's bring peace, because in the name of the peace, everything will be all right.
Yeah, sure.
And when you see that people that says, no, we have to be united, no, it doesn't matter how the other guy think, when you have this kind of mentality, you have a big problem.
Curiously, that happens to me yesterday. I met with some people and they had that kind of mentality. Not all of them, but one of them told me, where are we gonna go? We're not gonna go to the Democratic Party. I said, no, we don't have to go anywhere. We can stay here in the Republican Party. Yeah, but we need to then unite. And I say, unite with who? With those one who took everybody, specifically the candidates, the Republican candidate. They took the Republican candidate who qualified that week on March. They took them to the slaughterhouse when they knew that they violated the voting laws. They, the Secretary of State took a decision that it was not allowed for him to take that decision on changing so many things in favor of the Communist Democratic Party of America. And this is where we are now. They are talking now about unify. Oh, you guys, we need to forgive these people who are in charge, who did that, who did this to the voters, Georgian voters. We need to forgive them and move on. It's not about forgiving and move on, because with that same language in Venezuela in 1971?
In 1969.
1969. Look what is the result of Venezuela today.
The end result, exactly. So, in Pan Am Post made an article about the Simón Bolívar University, and it says, not even the Simón Bolívar University is safe from drug trafficking.
Simón Bolívar University in Venezuela is like we're talking about Harvard?
Harvard.
The Harvard of Venezuela.
Yes. Okay. It was supposed to be the most important technological university in Venezuela, because remember, socialism implies that the government directs the economy. Okay?
Yeah, is it the economy director?
Yes, it's the director of everything.
Yeah, like Joe Biden is doing now.
Yes.
And now Joe Biden is promoting free university.
Yes.
Like Venezuela.
Exactly.
Okay? All right.
Exactly.
All
So
right.
this article will show you in a very clear way what happened, not only with the university, but what happened with the country.
Okay. Yeah, because supposedly from that university, the brains, Venezuela's
The best-
brains come from that university.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
It says, reality showed that as a consequences of the policy of drug trafficking, the USB has been forced to operate for more than 2 decades under a regime of budget insufficiency. Of course, they depend 100% of the government. Okay? By 2021, the USB has delivered 46,177 university degrees, even though the administrative reality that is experienced day by day shows that only the will of the human capital keeps the fight. That's right, not even the Simon Bolivar University is what they said. It's safe for that gale that shakes the houses of higher studies in our country. USB fights fiercely, deciding to defeat ignorance through the spirit that constituted it and which paraphrases its hymn, immutable and intrinsical of light, of peace, of science, of conscience, and of truth. Okay. The Association of Alumni of the University of Simon Bolivar joined forces in defense of its history, tradition, and purpose. They seek to transform pain and indignation into actions. Funds are raised for the recovery and improvements of the physical plant, the information campaigns and promotion of new activities are created, donors are sought, and transparency is maintained in the destination of all money raised through portals and social networks. Resilience and will of the university community in the face of the obstacle of an efficiency public policy. Reality showed that as a consequence of the policy, in January 2020, the 50 years of the beginnings of the academic activities of USB were celebrated. An experimental university that opened with the support of then President of the Republic, Raúl Leoni, Rector Eloy Martinez, 508 students for the 1969 cohort, as well as 25 professors and 15 administrative employees. Today, the University of the Future has the honor of having graduated 3,538 master degrees, 485 doctorates, 37,530 undergraduate graduates, and 8,395 postgraduate graduates, for a total of 45,925 degrees delivered by the USB to Venezuelans, who, thanks to their training, they have fed their families, they have made investments for Venezuela and the world, they have done engineering, mathematics, biology, physics, and chemistry. It is calculated that around 90% of the graduates of the USB now lives outside of Venezuela.
That's what I was going to ask you. How can they graduate so many people and there is no job? There is no a place for them to stay and work.
That's the problem exactly with the socialism, because they create the most expensive employees in the world.
Wait a minute, but the ones who are working in the university are the ones who are making the money.
No, not even them, because they depend. they depend of the budget that came from the government, 100%. So, but that's the mentality. The government has to give me the resources, and I have to have the opportunity to study at a high level, and they work hard. Don't misunderstand me. But the thing is that the model is wrong.
But that is being implemented now here in America.
They are trying to implement the same thing, and that's why we're right now reading this thing.
But hold on. Let me interfere a little bit in here in this subject, because here in America, the one who are teaching in the university, they are the one who are making money. Look, I met in December a guy. He said that he works hard to send his daughter, to the university, to find out that all the money that he was paying for her to get a career, they were brainwashing his daughter.
Yeah.
But the amount of money that he was paying for that university, he said that he could buy another house, rent it out, and make a very, very good living, not only for him and his wife, but his children too.
Yeah.
So here in America, the teachers in the universities are the ones who are making money out of the parents who are working in capitalism, who are producing in capitalism, and they are watching the brain of their children to become communism, which is going to be nothing for them in the future.
Yeah, but you have open market.
Still.
That means that you don't like where you are. You can move out. You can do whatever you please. But when you have this kind of a structure, you even go out and do nothing, or try to get the knowledge and flee the country. And
so that father said, well, you know what I'm going to do, because she's being disrespectful. She doesn't respect me. I am the one who's paying. You know, their entitlement. Their entitlement syndrome.
$40,000
you know?
$40,000 a year.
No,
for 4 years it's $160,000.
Yeah, it's like he said he was talking about $250,000 in her career with expenses of housing and all the stuff, right?
Yes.
So do you know what he was saying? Well, now I'm gonna let her go on her own to school and see who she's gonna be requesting. You know, that entitlement that she's having. We are coming back in a minute. We're going for a break.
Whether cruising the strip in a 57 Chevy or taking the family on a vacation in a 71 Oldsmobile Vista Cruiser, you need to tune in to Classic Cars with Steve Ronaldo and Jim Weber every Saturday from 8 to 9 a.m. on AmericasWebRadio.com.
Hello, my name is Rick White, and I want to encourage all Georgia veterans to consider being nominated to the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame. And if you are a Georgia veteran, and the definition of a Georgia veteran is either you were born in the state of Georgia, or you've lived here 10 years, or you were raised your right hand and joined the military in this state, you are considered a Georgia veteran. For further information, go to www.gmvhof.org, or you can contact me at 678-427-0915. We'd love to have your nomination for the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame. Thank you so much.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Okay, by 2021, the University of Simon Bolivar has delivered around 47,000 university degrees. Right?
That means only 1,000 titles per year less than 1,000 titles in 50 years of operation. That's not a big return either.
A big deal, yeah.
No.
And then when it comes to technicians, they only graduated like around 30,000.
Yes.
Okay? So, but you know, for a healthy society to function, you have to have both.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Because if you don't have technicians, look what's going on here in America with the lack of technicians. What they do, they bring technicians from other countries.
That's
because here, the American did not prepare this generation.
That's what happened in the 40s and 50s, where Venezuela had to import people from Europe that were prepared in countries that were destroyed by the the war, and they bring these people to Venezuela. They flourish in Venezuela, and they create the big middle class of Venezuela of the 20th century. But that middle class, what happened with that middle class?
They're gone now, right?
Yeah. Every people from Italy, Spain, or Portugal that can leave the country, they left. They left already.
They already went through that situation, so they knew what they have to do.
Exactly.
Yes. So these universities are specializing people, giving them master degrees and doctorate degrees. Right? Okay. So we have another situation with the University Simón Bolívar. Is the numerous resignation and retirements of the personnel. Right? Academic, administrative, and worker, due to poor working condition, affects institutional performances. In addition, the position of retired personnel cannot be replaced. Okay. The other day, like 3 weeks ago, I was talking with one of. He just graduated in December. Okay, and he was hired right away to give some classes because they cannot find no professors to teach what he became as a graduated. So. Due to poor working conditions affect institutional performance, in addition, the position of retired personnel cannot be replaced. Following the instruction of the National Executive between 1998 and 2019, the regular teaching staff was reduced by 70% and the number of hired staff. So, they increased by 58%. Although the enrollment of student administration has increased, you see, after the prohibition of the application of the internet test in 2015 and open violation of university autonomy, schools' prosecution have decreased significantly. Between 2010 and 16, the average of active students who they did not enroll in each period, it has an estimated of 14%, while between 17 and 18, the percentage was 26%. So even in that drop too.
Yeah.
Okay, so they are making a society.
An ignorant society.
An ignorant society. And that's exactly what the socialists love, right?
Yes, that's what they are looking for. To have people that cannot discuss on anything, and eventually what you have is an obedient society.
An obedient society.
Yeah, that's what they are looking for, an obedient society.
So it's not only they are losing all this, what I said before, but they are also losing academic experience of the autonomous university for various reasons. It's also considered that 87% of them were not a scholarship holder. Okay, 85% used to the dining room service to eat, and 65% use public transport. Okay, but the significant successive loss of effectiveness and efficiency of the services has impacted on the increase in school dropouts. So exactly, if you don't have food at home, you don't have money for public transportation, it's a domino effect, right?
Yes, it's a domino effect.
Okay, the budget for 2021, we are in 2021, insufficiency of the university, of this specific university, Simón Bolívar, reaches 99%. Explain me that.
They are working only with 1% of the budget that they need. The rest is covered by the former students. Okay.
How do they cover the ex-former students?
Well, the former students are creating societies and groups that raise money in order to keep the university working. But you have to understand something. When that university was created, they created that place in a place named Sartenejas, that is very far from Caracas. So the people to go to that university must drive around 30 miles. Okay? 30 miles looks nothing here, but when you don't have transportation means it's a lot. So you don't have public transportation. The infrastructure in that university is poor. Okay, it used to be the best of the best, but if you don't give maintenance on those things, it's over. So right now, the university, you can read the rest of the article to make the comments, because we're almost on the
functioning
time.
the operation expenses are absolutely deficit. Have allocated resources for the reach 6 months at estimated value in 2020. The internet service stands out, whose annually budget granted enough to cover only 1 month. Okay. So curiously, the National Executive has established the need to provide the online education service due to COVID-19 pandemic. That disbursement of resources sent by National Executive between January and February reached only 14% of the total plan for the period. Maintenance services estimated to guarantee cover for the first 6 months of the year now cover 1 month. And are equivalent to 21% of the annual budget. The budgetary limitation preserve considering resources to cover investment expenses in academic projects and physical plans. 52 buildings, 180,000 of meter of construction only at the Sartenejas headquarters, as well as the decrease of the liabilities. So,
it's sad.
If the internet is not working for 6 months, only work for 1 month, and a lot of students are at home taking classes internet, so that one is going to collapse too.
Absolutely.
So the only university that is working because it's located the public.
Almost in the downtown of Caracas is the Central University.
The Central University.
The rest, you have to understand, this was created as the elite university, the best of the student being in that university.
And the people who got the money, the way to get to the place by owning a car, driving, gas, good.
At that moment, because the university was free, well, the students can be at home and get a car. In Venezuela, cars were cheap. Okay, the used cars, and the gasoline was almost.
So they don't have apartments around it where the students.
No, they don't have that.
It's not in Venezuela. It's not like that.
No, not like that. Okay, so the idea is that the Simón Bolívar University basically is dying. It's dying.
The Harvard of Venezuela is dying due to socialism.
Yes.
But they were teaching socialism while they were.
Well, the thing in that university is that the highest skilled university, the people of the Simón Bolívar University is not so involved in politics. But what happens, the old say that said, if you are not involved in politics, eventually politics
gets involved with you. And
And
then with this, that's my say here too in America. When a lot of people American, no, I don't follow politics. I don't care about politics. Well, you must well start getting involved, because one way or another, the politics is gonna get involved in your life, in your pocket, in your house, in your bedroom, with your children. Politics are gonna end up controlling your whole family and your personal life.
Yes.
What do you think, David?
That's true.
Yep.
Yeah, Steven Seagal had a meeting with Nicolás Maduro.
Steven Seagal, he's a communist.
Yeah, he went to Venezuela. He's
Interviewed Nicolás Maduro?
Yes, he was with Nicolás
And what was
Maduro.
the news? What was the
well,
news?
the Maduro gave him the sword of Bolivar.
Do you know any person get a hold of that sword from Simon Bolivar? They somehow end up dead.
Yes.
Steven Seagal doesn't know about it.
No, but you know
You know what Putin did, right? He returned it.
Yes.
That's what he did.
Returned it, yes.
Okay, so we're gonna talk next week about the sword,
the thing.
Simon Bolivar sword. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, David.
Quick Steaks, that's Q-U-I-K Steaks, are not just for surveyors. They are great for family and community gardens. Go online to www.quicksteak.com or contact your local land surveying supply dealer and get you a box of Quick Steaks. You'll love them every year when you plant your garden. Again, that's Quick Steaks, Q-U-I-K Steaks, the truly preferred way to stake and identify what's in your garden now.
Perhaps you are struggling to cope with the disease of addiction. If not, you probably know a family member or friend that needs help in battling the cravings and the personal and professional damage done by the effects of drugs or alcohol. Get a pen and paper and be ready to write down the following. These are the issues that the trained staff at the Atlanta Healing Center address and treat every day. Their doctors and counselors with over 40 years of practice in the field of addiction can treat the suffering individual in a thoughtful, compassionate, and experienced manner.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Good morning and welcome to America's Web Radio. We're glad to have you listening in, and this is going to be another excellent David's pick. And just been sitting here talking to our guests, and it's going to be another situation of talking about what a community, what a city is doing to honor their veterans. And we're very fortunate to have our guest on, Brian Johnson, today, and he's the city manager of Peachtree Corners, a city outside of Atlanta that has done something exceptional for remembering veterans. But before we get started, we're going to do what we have started a tradition of doing, and that's just taking a moment of time to remember all of our veterans and those that came before that have sacrificed and given the ultimate, and also the veterans that are alive today and the ones that are serving in active duty. As I had mentioned to Brian, I have a son that's a major in the Air Force, and I'm quite proud of him, and he's doing a wonderful job for his country. And that's so with that being said, we're going to take a moment, and all we ask is that you just think of the folks that have served and are serving. Thank you. Amen. We also do one other thing, and as I don't know how much you ran in the Navy, but when you went to the infantry, I'm sure you got to do some force marches. And I know when I was on active duty that going through basic and AIT that, that last half a mile of that force run in that area that had been pounded into dust, every now and then that your platoon sergeant or your platoon leader would start up a Jody. And I love our Jodies. Okay, so we've done our Jodies, and we appreciate that, and we forgot to turn off the cue. But anyway, we lived through that. And Brian, welcome to America's Web Radio.
Thanks for having me.
And look forward to hearing more about what you're doing. Well, first off, what you did do, and you were in the Gulf War in Iraq. And so you started out in the Navy and realized that the Navy was just a bunch of guys playing with boats, and decided to join the real guys, the infantry.
Well, I wouldn't go so far as to say we need to pick one or the other. They both certainly serve their purpose. But yes, I did start in my military career in the Navy. I enlisted in the Navy. Was in the cryptology branch of the Navy, specifically electronics intelligence, and spent 4 years there. And then near the end of my enlistment, at the time there was a shortage of officers in the Army, and happens cyclically, but there will be times where a branch will be short of officers, and what they'll do is they'll create a temporary program in which they will basically attract or attempt to attract some of the enlisted ranks of the other branches to come in and get commissioned. And the thought is that if you're already in the military, you already have gone through basic and learn military ethos and the culture, that if you can teach somebody to chew with their mouth closed and use utensils, you can make them into an officer. And so the Army, he created a program called Blue to Green, and it was a commissioning program, and I applied and got accepted, and had to go back through ROTC, and then did so through the University of Georgia, and then got commissioned as an infantry officer, and then spent another 5+ years active duty in the infantry of the Army, and then resigned my commission at the end of that, and here I am.
And here you are. And thank you for your service. And what do you do during the Army-Navy football game?
That's a great question I'm oftentimes asked, and you flip a coin. I like to see a great game, and I could go either way. Both of the teams are actually members of both service academies, so there's always some friendly rivalry even within the officer corps between officers who are commissioned through a service academy, through ROTC, or through OCS. So there's, as you will remember, you can basically break down rivalries into the smallest unit you can possibly do. There's rivalries amongst squads of a platoon, amongst branches of the military, amongst, nations, between ships, between divisions on the same ship. If you want, you can find some rivalry somewhere. We know that.
Brian, I think one thing that I have flashbacks of, and not seriously, but I'll think about when I was in or something, and I don't know of anybody that's gone through basic or AIT or whatever that hasn't popped his head up or her head up and said, why in the hell are we doing this, And now, 50 years later, I realize why they did it. And, all of a sudden it comes to, okay, that makes sense. It didn't make sense 50 years ago, but it makes sense today. And I think our military is one of the best organizations. Any branch is the best organization for any young person to go through. And we oftentimes, or every week, we suggest that if someone's graduating from high school or from college and they don't know exactly what they want to do, but they have an interest in something, there's a branch of the military that can fulfill their dreams and give them an education. And there's nothing that looks better on a person's resume than to say, I was in the service and I've got my honorable discharge and so forth and so on, because the HR person knows that they can depend on that person.
The military is certainly, and I would also join you in saying, the best organization to teach somebody both how to be a leader, but maybe is as importantly is how to be a good follower. And, we all have to do both wherever we're at. At some points we're leading some effort, some project, some group of people, and you've got to learn how to do that right and well. But you also have to learn how to be a good follower and support another leader, because we all have bosses. And I think it teaches both on how to be, a part of something bigger than yourself. And maybe the most important thing it did to me is it taught me the discipline I need to be able to, and self-control, to be able to deny myself things that I would rather be doing and instead work on things that I did not. I mean, I've got kids in middle school right now, and, one of the things that's difficult for them to, do, and I strive to teach, is for them to be able to say, look, I really should be studying something, but instead I would rather be something that's do something that's entertaining, and to be able to say, no, I'm not going to do that thing I want. Instead, I'm going to do the thing I need to do. And to have that discipline by yourself without a parent being over you is, once somebody does that and they can work hard, really the sky is the limit. And the military does such a good job of instilling that in someone, so that, later on, it was never as hard. I actually went back to grad school. I remember after, my stint in the military, and I remember how easy it was compared to what I remember undergrad to be, because all of a sudden I was merely just denying myself, things. Instead of, going to a movie or watching this or going out for some drinks, I was studying, and all of a sudden I was like, man, this is pretty easy, because military taught me how to do that. So yes, I mean, I am the man I am now, by and large, because of the military. Certainly other aspects, family and other stuff, but wouldn't trade 1 second of it. Even the times where I was cold, tired, miserable, people shooting at me, I wouldn't trade a second of it.
And again, thank you for your service, and thank you for your service in the Gulf War and the Middle East. I do, and particularly because of you're the city manager of Peachtree Corners, but part of your responsibility is the Peachtree Corners memorial that you all have. That is great. And I'm sure when you're out there, or I don't know what other organizations you may belong to, but I do always ask one hardball question. And if you need time to think about it, well, I'll give you time to think about it. But that hardball question is, when you're with a group of your peers, other veterans, can you name one veteran that can tell one story only?
Not at all. I don't need to hit any. Not at all.
You got 6 veterans at a table, and you got about 120 different stories that are about to be released. And but that's great. And this is something that we also stress, and is that, in our opinion, today, our veterans are our history books. And every veteran that's listening and listens to any of our shows, they should take their kids or their grandkids or whatever the case might be and tell them about their time in the service. It doesn't have to be gory details or anything like that. It can just be, well, I made this buddy in AIT, or I got to be friends with someone, or whatever, but a story about what they did and what it was like, and the homecoming, and how it was to be separated from your family and so forth. But it's a shame, but our history books are lacking in stories of veterans, and that's why we do this show, why we have a show called A Veteran's Story, and many other shows that we're addressing veterans to please tell their kids and grandkids, because you are the history books.
Military service is a very unique experience that, not very many people can empathize with. But because of this one fact, it does make it unique, and that is, those who volunteer, and it's a volunteer organization, but when they volunteer, they're essentially giving Uncle Sam a blank check. And that blank check could be, Uncle Sam may ultimately have to, write the ultimate sacrifice on that check. But for somebody to do that does take a special kind, because it's not like, most of the stuff in the military, most people can do. There's a few things, that not everybody can do, meaning that not everybody has the ability to do it. A lot of it tends to be physical, physical ability. But what really separates, and even within the infantry is hard, but a lot of people could do it. What really separates that is the fact that those people who are in it voluntarily subjected themselves to doing something that others decided not to do. It's not that they couldn't, but other people were like, no, I don't want to do that. And it's hard living, but there are people out there who said, nope, I'll step up. I'll be the one to, hold the line, to walk the post, to protect, our freedoms. And doing so does create unique experiences and stories. And yes, those stories should be passed down, if not for no other reason, to inspire our next generation of the importance of service.
And the importance of our country and our flag. Mm-hmm. I've never had any experience, and I hope I never do, but I've thought often, as we have a flag behind you, a folded flag on our desk, and I don't know, at least if it's in Peachtree Corners, I got somebody now that I can call, but if I came up on somebody destroying our flag, I don't know what I'd do.
It's sacred, and we actually have two locations in which, we have very formal, caretaking of the flag. One is at City Hall. In front of City Hall, we have a flag plaza. And then at our Veterans Monument, which is, a couple miles up the road at our town center, and it has a flag plaza. And both of them have a flag, lighted flag plaza that has, individuals responsible for ensuring the flag, all the flags, but, specifically the U.S. flag is in good condition. If it's supposed to be at half staff, to go out there and do that, and to take care of it properly. And when the flag is not in good condition, it is lowered properly, replaced properly. And then we have a Boy Scout troop, a local Boy Scout troop, that actually has a ceremony that destroys the flag per U.S. code as to how to do it. And so it is, a lot of people have looked at that design on that piece of, cloth, and again, paid the ultimate sacrifice and been subjected to some stuff. And so it is a sacred thing. But it's a great rallying symbol for us to rally around.
I think I'm much older than you are, but even at my age, I still get chill bumps, and when an honor guard passes, to me, that's one of the greatest examples of love of a country that you can have. And I get goosebumps, chill bumps, whatever you want to call them, but I can't get away from it.
Same here.
It's just something that's so unique. And like you said, our in my opinion, I was in both ends of the stick, so to speak. I was the end of the draft. I was the start of the lottery, and the end, or what started out as the end of that started the volunteer army. And in my company, I had all three, and I volunteered, but we had draftees, we had those that had been gotten by the lottery, and then we had volunteers, and I don't know. There's something about a volunteer, and I love the volunteer military. I think it's one of the best things that ever happened. You know where the person's head is when they come in. And,
there's always, certainly, unfortunately, examples of those who don't necessarily maintain the standard that the military should. But by and large, when it is a volunteer army, you get a much better cut of individual than if there's conscription, just because, if nothing else, the attitude. Yes. I mean, if you have a good attitude and you at least initially want something, you are more apt to try harder, endure, more discomfort or even pain to achieve that than if it's imposed on you. And so attitude, is a huge difference in changing. I've been through a lot of schools and seen people, whether it's jump school, Ranger school, Pathfinder school, the schools that have high attrition rates. And it's usually not the physical ability of the individual that separates those who graduate and don't. It's usually the mental attitude and the ability to just fight through the discomfort, pain, and just keep going and never say quit. I've seen physical specimens that I look at and I'm like, wow. I mean, that's just, and they ultimately can't hack it. And I've seen guys that are, somewhat diminutive, guys that you would be like, there's no way they can do it. And they're just like a raw piece of leather. You just can't tear it apart. They're just as tough as we call, as tough as woodpecker lips. And you can't, you can't break them. And so it's a more of a mental thing oftentimes than anything, and separates the men from the boys, as they say.
And this is, it also separates a winning attitude from somebody that's, our enemy or potential enemy. They'll never have that. Let's talk about Peachtree Corners for a minute. Talk about the memorial and the business as a city manager. What all does that entail as well?
Well, I guess I'll start with the last one first. The city of Peachtree Corners, like you said, we're North Atlanta suburb, about 50,000 people, north of 285 in Gwinnett County, largest city in Gwinnett. We're only about 8.5 years old, almost 9 years old. We were created 2012. And we operate our city, the best way to describe it is very similar to a corporation in that the governing body is a board of directors. In our case, it's called a city council. The board of directors is led by the mayor. He's the chairman of that board as the mayor. And that board of directors hires a CEO to run the organization for them. And in this case, as a city, it's the city manager. So my board of directors hired me, and I work for all 7 of them equally. And, technically I am, 4 or more votes away from being fired at any time. I've got but I work for them and I advise them when they're considering policies, and I execute the policies that they vote on and operate the city on their behalf, providing all the services a typical city does. So my job, is to run the city. And in the case of the Veterans Monument, some of this, I'm the second city manager the city's ever had. And I only say that to say that the monument effort started before I got to the city. It was started both by some conversations between some residents of the city and specifically 2 members of City Council, Mayor Mike Mason and Councilman Alex Wright. both who were veterans and the conversation about doing something to honor the veterans. And over the course of a number of years, there was a veterans nonprofit, Veterans Monument nonprofit that was created. There was a fundraising campaign, and the funds were raised to create a monument, and it was done so at the city's town center that the city was constructing at the time, and when property was carved out along our town green to construct this monument. And the monument is a phenomenal project. There are statues representing some, a certain member of each branch of the military. There's a brick paver plaza for people to purchase a brick paver to honor a veteran of some sort, and it's got a big plaza, places to sit, and then we've got a digital kiosk. And so what we've done is the city had a company come in and record short 2 to 3 minute interviews of people who purchased a brick paver, and allowed either that person who was, name was on the brick paver, or a family to talk about one who maybe have passed away already. They get interviewed or were interviewed, and then that interview is captured and it's hosted on a web platform, and you can go over there and with your phone and a QR code, you can actually pull up a name of somebody who's honored there, and then you can either hear in their own words the interview, or a family member could talk about their service. So it brings to life much more than just a name on a brick paver, which is cool in and of itself. But in this case, you actually get to hear a little bit about that particular veteran that's being honored and so we feel, we think that's a pretty cool feature of the Veterans Monument, is to have that living aspect of it. And you can watch it right there. You can go to the website. You don't even have to be there. You can go to the website and watch all of them, or you can, while you're out on site, pull up somebody right there, and you could be staring at their brick paver and then watching an interview about them or by them and their service. So that's what we've done. It's at our, town green, and so there's a lot of entertainment around there too, but it is certainly a destination location in and of itself for those who want to maybe spend a few minutes thinking about those who've served and honoring their service.
This is, as we were talking before the show, this is something that hopefully America's Web Radio is doing, and we're not a local station. We're heard all over the world, and a lot of folks from coast to coast, and we have a great audience in Australia and in the UK as well. But if you're traveling, well, first off, let me beat on locals. If you live in Atlanta, in the Atlanta area, and you haven't been to Peachtree Corners, or I'm going to play a spot in a minute for the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame, and Rick White, who's the director, and also Johns Creek, that has the wall that heals. It's the replica of the Vietnam Veterans Wall in Washington, D.C., and this is the one that traveled all over the United States, and Johns Creek bought it and has given it a permanent home in Newtown Park. And so if you live in Atlanta or around Atlanta and haven't been to these different locations, you deserve it. You deserve to take your kids to it, or your grandkids to these locations. Make day trips out of it, and it'll be worth every minute that you spend there. And just like Brian was saying, as far as Peachtree Corners is concerned, not only can you make a day trip out of it, there are great restaurants all around that you can eat at, and just be with your family and do something for your family and the veterans that have kept us free, and learn about them.
To decide to maybe do that, where
Absolutely.
You can go to each, and then in the Johns Creek case, theirs is, about, inside of 10 miles away from ours. So you could actually go see both and experience some of the amenities. Newtown Park has, kind of city park amenities to it. Our town center has some of those, and restaurants and other. So you can make a day of it, or a half day of it. But yes, we have a great opportunity to do it here in a couple weeks.
Oh yeah, no question about it. And we certainly encourage you to, and if you're traveling from another country and coming to the Atlanta area, it's worth your while to do it as well. Or if you're just traveling from California, they ain't got nothing like what we got.
Well, you don't even have to, you actually don't even have to, if you can't physically go there. Again, our monument has a website.
Mm-hmm.
If you do Peachtree Corners Veterans Monument, you can pull up the website, and then you can watch the interviews of a lot of the people who are honored in the Brick Paver Plaza there. So you can actually experience it from anywhere.
This is one thing that I find very interesting, and I always, whatever show we happen to be doing or involved in, but the things that I learn from each one of the shows, and, it's like I said about Rick White and Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame. And, Georgia, Peachtree Corners, Johns Creek, and certainly downtown Atlanta with the Hall of Fame have been leaders, and other states now are beginning to copy us and asking advice, and I'm sure you get calls all the time. How do you do it? What do we do? How do we raise the money? And, this is it. I'm a Texan and always will be a Texan, but I have pride in Georgia that we've been the leaders, cities like Peachtree Corners and Johns Creek and so forth, that have taken it on yourselves. And we must have some of the most wonderful veterans living near Peachtree Corners or from all over the state.
We do, and we are convinced that the success of our effort and the attractiveness of our monument is due to really what's a public-private partnership between the private citizens that form the group to fundraise, to generate buzz, energy, interest in it, to go out and shake the trees of all the veterans that sometimes are hidden, that you don't realize you've got gems right in your backyard of people who served in really interesting places or during really interesting times in our history. And, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be, during combat. I mean, there are certainly some places and experiences we've had in our history that don't result in bullets flying. And, but to shake the trees and get all of that going to where you get people making contributions, you're doing fundraising, but then the public side of it is once that happens, sometimes these efforts fail at the end because there's really not a long-term solution to how is it going to be maintained once you construct it. Where are you going to find property to put it? Who's going to maintain web platforms and, so on and so forth, organize events. And sometimes the local resident volunteers, they come and go, and unfortunately in the cycle of life, they pass away. And you got to have some, plan on how to maintain it, which is where we think, in our case, the public part comes. And, led by Mayor Mason and Councilman Wright, and then the rest of the city council being very supportive of it, the city is involved in making sure that it stays, a great facility. It's maintained properly. We can continue to add brick pavers, more interviews, web hosting, all the things that you need to have an organization be there to do. The city's there to do because we know the city will always exist. And so when you make it a part of our yearly operations and you put money in the budget to ensure that it stays at a high level, that public-private partnership is what we feel is how this effort has been a success and will continue to be a success. So if there's anybody considering it, I would be, highly encourage you to come up with that partnership between the local volunteers and the fabric of the community and a public entity that can make sure that once that effort is done, that whatever product they've produced, it maintains at a high level.
Brian, we're going to take out a minute to hear a couple of announcements, and we'll be back with Brian right after this. Stay tuned.
Hi, this is Rocky Blair, former four-time Super Bowl champion with the Pittsburgh Steelers and Vietnam veteran. As a board member, I'd like to talk to you about Warriors to Citizen, a nonprofit organization that helps American heroes, soldiers, police, fire, EMT, and their families recover from the psychological harm caused by career-induced stress. Over the last 20 years, broken relationships have been a major causal factor for the highest documented divorce rate and resulting suicides in this population. This program, From Warriors to Citizen, is delivered free to families by professionals, all whom served in uniform and understand the needs to be addressed. I ask for your support, so please go to our website, warriorstocitizen.org, and find out how you can help, either by making a donation or sharing this information with an American hero that you may know. And thank you.
Hello, my name is Rick White, and I'm the director of the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame. I want to encourage all Georgia veterans to consider being nominated to the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame. And if you are a Georgia veteran, and the definition of a Georgia veteran is either you were born in the state of Georgia, or you've lived here 10 years, or you were raised your right hand and joined the military in this state, you are considered a Georgia veteran. For further information, go to www.gmvhof.org, or you can contact me at 678-427-0915. We'd love to have your nomination for the Georgia Military Veterans Hall of Fame. Thank you so much.
This is America's Web Radio. Would you like to have a show, talk about your business, or express your opinion on America's Web Radio? Just email gm@americaswebradio.com and we'll get back to you. Thank you.
And we appreciate you listening to America's Web Radio. And we have the city manager of Peachtree Corners with us today, Brian Johnson. And Brian is a veteran himself. And we've been talking about the memorial that you all have at Peachtree Corners. And you've got an event coming up for Memorial Day, is it?
We do. So we have a Veterans Memorial. You know, there's a nonprofit that was set up to fundraise and kind of, lead the effort to construct the Veterans Monument that we have. And they organize a number of events at the monument itself, and we have one coming up on Memorial Day, in which it'll be it's a pretty cool event in and of itself, where you have honor guard. You'll have a guest speaker, usually a prominent military veteran that will speak. Of course, Mayor Mason and Councilman Ryder are always involved. You'll oftentimes have some visiting dignitaries. We've had consul generals there and others, and so it'll be a program, but it'll be there to to speak about what Memorial Day is